Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Mary Griffiths. In 2009, Mary Griffiths was a 38-years-old woman and the mother of 3 daughters, aged 9, 10, and 13. All 3 children were born during her marriage. However, her relationship with her husband did not last long. By 2007, they had divorced, but they remained on good terms. Mary was granted primary custody of the children while her ex-husband took them on weekends. There were no disputes regarding this arrangement. Mary focused on moving forward and providing for her daughters. She worked hard to ensure they had everything they needed. To save time on commuting and spend more time with her children, she found a job as a fitness instructor at a gym near her rented home. Over time, Mary was able to purchase a house in the small town of Bury Street, Edmonds, UK. Her life seemed to be improving more and more. Mary decided to try building a relationship again. With her good looks, attractiveness, and great physical shape, she felt confident that finding a partner wouldn't be a problem. Thanks to her outgoing personality and striking appearance, she quickly caught the attention of John McFarlane. They met during a time when both were searching for new jobs. As they got to know each other, they discovered a shared passion for martial arts, sports, and similar perspectives on life. Over time, Mary and John began taking the same fitness classes. They both became instructors at the same fitness center. Despite some clear differences between them, they connected easily. They began spending more time together, commuting to work, having lunch, and hanging out after their shifts. John even covered for Mary at work when she couldn't make it. However, for Mary, the relationship was just a friendship. Mary is outgoing, so she easily connects with people, including John. She considers him a friend and firmly believes their relationship is purely platonic. When speaking with her family and friends, she often emphasizes that there is absolutely no possibility of a romantic relationship between her and John, partly because he is married. Unfortunately, John saw things differently. He interpreted Mary's friendliness and conversations with him as a sign that they could become a couple. Deeply infatuated with her, he began to romanticize their interactions. Mary's behavior only reinforced his feelings. For years after they became friends, Mary helped organize John's 40th birthday party. John misinterpreted this gesture as something deeply personal, an indication that she had romantic feelings for him, which only reinforced his certainty about his feelings for her. John was naturally introverted and had little experience with women who offered him the kind of warmth and care that Mary did. His marriage had grown cold over time, so Mary's attitude felt especially significant to him. After the birthday party, he started dreaming of a life with her by his side. These fantasies quickly turned into an obsession, despite him still being married. He began discussing with his friends the possibility of divorcing his wife to pursue Mary. Mary, however, was unaware of his feelings. A few months later, she started dating someone else, which shocked and disappointed him. Mary was happy in her new relationship and openly shared details with him, not realizing the emotional pain it caused. For him, the situation became deeply traumatic. Resentment and anger built up over time, eventually becoming impossible for him to contain. Mary shared a post about her boyfriend on social media, and that was when the problem started. John responded to the post by leaving angry messages. He insulted Mary and made baseless accusations, including infidelity and a reckless lifestyle, none of which were true. John's behavior grew increasingly obsessive, and he started attempting to intimidate Mary through frequent and unsettling phone calls. Mary started to notice that John would appear at places she visited, even though he had no reason to know her whereabouts. Their interactions dwindled, and the distance between them grew, but John was clearly unhappy about this. The tension escalated further as he bombarded her with daily phone calls. His erratic behavior began to strain her relationship with her new boyfriend. Mary's friends and family observed that John acted as though they had been in a romantic relationship and believed she had betrayed him. He seemed consumed by these imagined scenarios, leading to ongoing dissatisfaction and aggression. Although John's actions were not illegal, Mary had made it clear on multiple occasions that she only considered him a friend and never intended for their relationship to be more than platonic. Unfortunately, John's perception of the situation did not align with reality. Mary grew increasingly anxious due to John's troubling behavior. Fearing his aggression, she avoided public places in the city, worried she might encounter him. Her fears escalated when an intruder entered her home late at night and slashed all 4 tires on her car. She suspected that John was responsible. She was convinced he wanted to sabotage her relationship with her new boyfriend, leaving her isolated. His interference was successful when he spread false information about her, ultimately causing her and her boyfriend to break up. Mary was devastated by the breakup, while John felt triumphant. Misinterpreting her distress, he believed she was now available and ready to be with him. He saw her resistance as playful teasing, deluding himself with fantasies about their connection. Feeling haunted, John took a drastic step. After learning that Mary had broken up with her boyfriend, he immediately went to court to file for divorce from his wife. Although they had been married for over 20 years, John was determined to leave and start a new life with another woman. This became particularly troubling when Mary found out. She couldn't understand where he was getting his ideas or what was influencing his decisions. The entire situation deeply unsettled her. Seeking advice, she often spoke with her relatives, who encouraged her to contact the police. Mary had enough evidence to take action against him, but her doing so only escalated the situation. John began bombarding Mary with calls and messages. In each message, he expressed his intense emotions, insisting they could be incredibly happy together if she agreed. He claimed Mary had feelings for him that she was suppressing, urging her to be honest and embrace them so they could pursue a life together. However, Mary had no such intentions. In one conversation, she firmly stated that they were just friends and that she had no plans to take their relationship beyond that. This upset John, as his perspective on friendship was different from Mary's. Yet, he couldn't resist trying to become more involved in her life. Although she rejected all his romantic advances, she still maintained their friendship. It seemed she pitied him, and perhaps even feared that ending their connection would lead to serious problems. Mary hoped to continue the relationship peacefully. He, however, took every opportunity to be near her, visiting her home frequently, and she always let him in. During these visits, he repeatedly made advances, such as attempting to kiss her when they sat together on the couch. Mary consistently rejected him, but he persisted. Mary considered ending the meetings, but John then used his cleverness to get closer to her daughters. He bonded with them, spending quality time together, and they began asking when he would visit again. After John's divorce, he spent almost all his free time with Mary and her children, as though he were waiting for them to invite him to live with them. Meanwhile, Mary's relationship with her ex-boyfriend remained unresolved. Both she and her ex had doubts and considered rekindling their relationship. However, those doubts were primarily rooted in John's behavior, making them uncertain about the possibility of being together again. Whenever John sees Mary and her ex-boyfriend together, he gets angry and often has aggressive outbursts. On one occasion, he lost control entirely. Still, she tried to remain patient, while John blamed her for the breakup of his relationship. Eventually, she asked her ex-boyfriend to visit her home more frequently to help her and her children feel safer during those moments. When John found out, he reacted badly. He began posting misleading content on social media, claiming he was in a relationship with Mary. Tired of the situation, she decided to put an end to it. She left a comment under the post, clearly stating that there was no relationship between them. In this situation, the most reasonable thing for John to do is leave Mary alone and focus on his life, allowing her to mend her relationship with her ex-boyfriend. However, John went to Mary's house again instead. By exploiting her sympathy, he convinced her to let him in. Mary, having a kind heart and considering him a friend, allowed him to stay the night, offering him the couch. It was a stormy evening, and she didn't have it in her to leave him out in the bad weather. He appealed to her compassion, reminding her of his struggles after being kicked out by his wife. The arrangement was that he would sleep on the couch, and the next morning, after the children left for school, they would discuss and clarify the situation. For John, it was all just a game. That same night, he attempted to seduce Mary. Mary, however, believed that he stood in her doorway at night, watching her as she slept. At the time, she was in bed with her youngest daughter, who was afraid to sleep alone in her room. She woke up feeling unnerved by his unsettling gaze. She began yelling at him to go away, which woke the children. The incident led to another heated outburst, during which John accused his friend of giving false hope only to crush it for his own amusement. Afterwards, John left, but things took an even darker turn. He started posting alarming content on his social media accounts, talking about death and hinting at ending his life. He also shared these thoughts with many of his friends. At one point, he even shared a disturbing photo of himself standing next to a noose in a barn, as if he were preparing to follow through on his threats. His actions escalated further when he attempted to swallow sleeping pills on 2 separate occasions in a short time span, both of which required medical intervention. On May 3, 2009, John's behavior had become so troubling that Mary insisted he see a psychiatrist. His friends, including his ex-wife, agreed with her. However, the psychiatrist could not diagnose John with any mental disorders and concluded that he was not a danger to himself or others. This misjudgment would prove to be the first in a series of tragic mistakes with devastating consequences. It seemed that John was aware of the issues he was facing and became distressed when the doctors decided not to treat him or admit him to a psychiatric clinic. This news deeply frightened Mary. She felt threatened, worried for the girls around her, and helpless in the face of this danger. On May 5, 2009, Mary's worst fears began to come true. That day, she called emergency services at 999. She told the operator that her friend, John, was acting erratically and appeared to have gone crazy. His alarming behavior left her anxious and unsure of how to handle the situation. Mary explained his history of stalking, his inappropriate actions, and his references to ending his life. Despite these concerns, the operator assessed the situation as non-urgent, indicating a response time of 1 to 4 hours, as all officers were occupied. Mary was informed that a police officer would only be able to visit her the following morning. The operator advised her to call again if the situation escalated, promising a faster response in that case. However, Mary had valid reasons for her initial call. On that day, John attacked her for the first time, exploiting his knowledge of her vulnerabilities. Injured in the attack, she sought treatment for her leg at the hospital. But upon returning home, she found John waiting for her. He was relentless, always lingering near her, pretending to support her, and trying to convince her that she could not live without him. The situation became so dire that when Mary was putting her daughters to bed, the girls were deeply afraid that John might return and harm their mother, possibly taking her away forever. John, finally driven away, was furious. He sent Mary a threatening message, feeling rejected and vowing revenge. Those who knew him were deeply concerned about his behavior and even alerted the police. For instance, Mary's friend called emergency services at around 6:30 p.m. that same day, expressing worry about John's mental state due to his volatile actions. Despite clear evidence of John's dangerous behavior, the authorities failed to take Mary's friend's warning seriously or consider the urgency of her earlier call. Much later, close to midnight, John himself made another call to the police to report a robbery. This ensured that the officers would respond to his call, giving him the opportunity to go to Mary's house. Before leaving, he sent a message to his wife, expressing that he still loved her but blaming her for their problems and the breakup with Mary. He ended the message with an ominous and ambiguous note, suggesting he planned to resolve matters once and for all. John armed himself with an axe and a specialized weapon used for slaughtering cattle, then headed toward Mary's house. At the time, Mary was resting with her children, completely unaware of the impending danger. Around midnight, John arrived at her house, standing near the back door. He used the axe to break in, then threw it in the kitchen. He proceeded to locate the fuse box, which he knew from previous visits, and cut off the electricity to the entire house. With the power out, he climbed the stairs to the second floor. Mary was asleep in her room with her 10-year-old daughter but woke up when she heard someone entering. Confused, she tried to turn on the light and realized it wasn't working. In a moment of terror, she recognized who the intruder must be. Before she could act, John attacked her. He began hitting her and dragged her out of the bed onto the floor, where he pinned her down and started choking her. The commotion woke up all the children in the house. They tried to resist John, but he was much stronger than they were. He injured 2 children and attacked Mary, aiming for her chest. She managed to dodge, but the bullet hit her shoulder, leaving her wounded. This escalated into a desperate fight for survival. Despite her injury, she fought back with all her strength. Realizing she couldn't overpower him, she decided to reach the street, hoping to draw him away from the children and call for help. Mary's 2 daughters were injured and unable to resist any longer, and Mary tried her best to protect them. John attempted to strangle her but failed. Injured and desperate, she struggled to make her way to the front door. She managed to run down the stairs and out onto the street, screaming for help. Her cries caught the attention of the neighbors, who began coming outside to see what was going on. Several witnesses saw John holding a weapon, which he pointed at Mary's chest as she stood terrified. In front of everyone, including children, he attacked twice. Among the neighbors was an off-duty policeman who had been at home resting. The officer approached John, trying to calm him down and reason with him. Without hesitation, he aimed the weapon at the officer, threatening to attack. Unarmed, the policeman raised his hands and retreated, a move that likely saved his life. Afterward, John struck Mary's youngest daughter and fled the scene. Among the neighbors were doctors who attempted to assist Mary while waiting for an ambulance, but tragically, their efforts were in vain. She passed away. 2 of her daughters required hospital treatment, though their injuries were not severe, at least physically. Thankfully, the situation did not escalate to the worst-case scenario. Later, it was revealed that John's original plan was not to harm Mary but to target her children. However, his plan didn't go as intended. He had also planned to take his own life in Mary's home to ensure she lived with the resulting trauma. He shared this sinister plan with a friend through a messaging app, explaining that this was his idea of revenge for Mary breaking his heart. Sadly, the friend dismissed these remarks and did not intervene, merely advising John to return to his wife and calm down. After attacking Mary, John immediately wrote to the same friend and confessed what he had done. He was later found bleeding near the house where he had been living for the past few weeks. Upon returning to the house, he attempted to end his life by cutting his wrist but was rescued in time. After regaining consciousness, he claimed to experience memory lapses. He stated that he recalled multiple attempts to end his life, including one just before his arrest. John told the police about his relationship with Mary, describing how she had rejected and betrayed him. Vaguely, he remembered fragments of their fight and the attack, but most of his memories were missing. While it appeared that he may have been in a state of emotional distress, the detectives believed he was feigning mental health issues to avoid responsibility for his actions. Their suspicions were reinforced by evidence that John had carefully planned the crime. He had shared the plan with a friend, said goodbye to his ex-wife, and even contacted the authorities beforehand to delay their arrival. John took weapons from the farm where he worked and spent additional time at the fitness center prior to committing the crime. This further demonstrates that his actions were intentional, in contrast to those of individuals suffering from severe mental illnesses. Predictably, the defense attorney argued that John suffered from a mental disorder and had endured a difficult childhood. Following this argument, John was sent for a psychiatric evaluation, which confirmed that he had a severe form of depressive disorder. Despite receiving this diagnosis, he did not admit guilt, claiming that he could not remember anything. Initially, the prosecution aimed to prove premeditated murder in court, but this course of action was eventually deemed unnecessary. After assessing all relevant factors, John's lawyer advised him to accept responsibility. John changed his testimony and pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter, although he maintained that much of what had occurred was beyond his memory. For Mary's family, this confession brought some degree of relief. Nevertheless, they were compelled to endure the hearing, during which they agonizingly learned the harrowing details of Mary's final moments. John McFarlane received a sentence of life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Typically, parole for such crimes is not considered until after 30 years. However, the court reduced the minimum term to 20 years, citing confirmed mental health issues as a mitigating factor. Mary's family was outraged that the court had considered John's mental health as justification for a reduced sentence. They strongly believed that John deserved a far harsher punishment, arguing that he not only killed Mary but also posed a serious threat to others, including her children. In their view, John should remain isolated from society permanently. The family testified to John's obsessive and dangerous behavior, presenting evidence that he had initially planned to harm the children. Ultimately, it appeared that Mary's desperate struggle with John had diverted his attention away from the children, but at the cost of her own life. Due to the persistent efforts of Mary's family, the case was reviewed. As a result, John's minimum sentence of 20 years was increased to the standard 30 years. Following the retrial, the senior investigator approached Mary and expressed hope that the revised decision and extended sentence would provide her greater comfort. However, the matter did not end there. Mary's children, Sophie, the youngest, turned 18, Hannah, 19, and Jessica, 22, jointly decided to pursue accountability for those they believed had contributed to John's attack. They held the police department, specifically the dispatcher, and the psychiatrist who had deemed John sane and failed to mandate psychiatric treatment, responsible for their perceived negligence. They argued that if the danger posed by John had been fully understood, Mary might still be alive. This seemed logical, as even a brief conversation with a psychiatrist, who had evaluated John after his arrest, reportedly revealed signs of mental illness. Serious psychological issues had clearly been overlooked, and it remained unclear why 2 previous hospital tests had failed to detect similar problems. It became evident that the response to calls placed by Mary and her friend, made only half an hour apart, was inadequate. The dispatcher underestimated the severity of the situation, which they believed to be the main reason the police failed to respond in time to prevent the tragedy. This failure prompted revisions to several regulations aimed at improving threat detection and enhancing police procedures. It was decided that law enforcement officers had fulfilled everything correctly within the regulations. However, Sophie, Hannah, and Jessica do not lose hope that their efforts were not in vain and that this will at least help save the lives of other victims. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Marty Hill. Marty Hill, 42, lives in a cozy little town called Prairie Village, Kansas, USA. She is energetic, cheerful, and kind. From a young age, she was drawn to fine art, dreaming of becoming an artist or designer. To pursue this dream, she worked hard, completed her studies, and gained the necessary educational background. Eventually, she fulfilled her dream by working in the design studio of a clothing company. At the company, Marty is always highly regarded for his outstanding achievements and reliability. So, when she failed to show up for work on September 8, 2010, without any notice, everyone immediately suspected that something was wrong. No one knew what had happened, and she had not requested any leave. Initially, her colleagues hoped she might just be running late. They tried calling her but received no response and decided to wait a little longer. An important meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m., and Marty's attendance was deemed essential. Her absence worried everyone since she was always responsible and fully aware of the meeting's importance. She is usually deeply involved with the group and consistently reports any issues, so her silence in this case is unusual. Growing increasingly uneasy, one of her friends tried calling her repeatedly, but the calls went unanswered. Overcome with fear, the friend began to break down in tears, sensing deep in her heart that something terrible might have happened to Marty. A friend decided to find out what had happened to Marty. One of her colleagues offered to visit her house and check on her. He arrived at her quiet residential neighborhood at 11:30 a.m. and knocked on her door, but there was no answer. This seemed odd, especially since her car was parked in a driveway, suggesting she should have been home. He walked around the house but saw nothing unusual, although he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The unsettling silence made him uneasy, so he returned to his car. The colleague returned to the office and discussed the situation with the others. They decided it was necessary to call the police to check on Marty. Because Marty had a 15-year-old daughter who was at school at the time, they agreed not to alarm her until they obtained more information about Marty's whereabouts. Eventually, the police were contacted, and the colleague stayed near Marty's driveway, waiting for the police to arrive. The police arrived at the scene within minutes. When the officer knocked on the door, there was no response, and there were no signs of forced entry. Looking through a window, he noticed a woman's purse sitting on the kitchen table, which indicated that Marty should have been inside. Concerned, the officer decided to check the door, suspecting she might be unwell and in need of help. To his surprise, the door was unlocked. The officer entered the house and searched the first and second floors but found nothing out of the ordinary. He then proceeded to check the basement. Using a flashlight, the officer realized there were no lights in the basement. As he descended to the very bottom, he spotted someone lying in a large pool of blood, curled up in a fetal position. The dim light revealed a gruesome scene. The room was splattered with so much blood that it resembled a torture chamber. At first, the police thought the victim was a man due to the large amount of blood, but upon closer inspection, they couldn't even determine the victim's gender. Based on the scene, they concluded that the person was dead. However, to their horror, the victim suddenly turned around and looked directly at them. The police discovered a severe wound on the victim's throat and observed that her face was so swollen, disfigured it resembled a gruesome, bloody mess. Believing the victim was on the verge of death, an officer leaned in and repeatedly asked, "Who did this?" Despite his efforts, the victim struggled to breathe and was unable to speak. Prior to questioning, the officer had already called for medical assistance. Though still alive, the victim was unable to reveal the identity of her attacker. The victim was rushed to the nearest hospital due to her critical condition, which made identifying her difficult. Her injuries were concentrated on her head and face, including multiple skull fractures, facial fractures, a concussion, and cerebral swelling. The wound was particularly devastating, slicing through muscles and vital blood vessels. Medical experts estimated her chances of survival at no more than 20%. Finally, the victim was identified to be Marty Hill, the owner of the home. Against all odds, the doctors managed to save her life. Attention immediately turned to her teenage daughter, Mackenzie, who was contacted right away. Mackenzie was in complete shock and had no idea what had transpired at their home. Upon hearing of the brutal attack, family members rushed to the hospital to be with Marty. The extent of her suffering was unimaginable, and her injuries were so severe that even her own mother didn't recognize her. Unfortunately, the doctors all gave the same grim prognosis regarding her chances of survival. Her condition was serious, but at least it was somewhat manageable. Family members took turns staying by her bedside every day. The situation was so overwhelming that they felt a mix of anger and helplessness. Her son, Stephen, felt the most anger. Living in Texas at the time, he returned home to be with his mother and offer his support. Stephen was the first person to enter the basement where his mother had been found. After the forensic investigator examined the house, they emerged from the basement and strictly prohibited anyone else from entering due to the gruesome nature of the scene. While the relatives grieved, Stephen cleaned up the blood himself. Detectives investigating the tragedy were baffled, unable to determine who could have committed such an act or why. Marty's family and friends were equally perplexed, as no one could imagine her having an enemy capable of such violence. Investigators searched for clues in her personal life, workplace, and relationships with her children but found nothing unusual. The crime was determined to be unrelated to abuse, as Marty's clothes remained intact, a conclusion later confirmed by the Armed Forces analysis. There was no indication of theft, nothing was missing, and the house showed no signs of forced entry. The circumstances of the crime were shrouded in mystery. Even Marty herself was unable to provide any information about the identity of her attacker. The police interviewed Marty's neighbors, but none of them were able to provide any significant information. The only clue reported was a sighting of a red, broken pickup truck near Marty's house at around 8 a.m., driven by a young, light-skinned, short man. This timing aligned with the approximate time of the attack determined by detectives. The officers followed up by visiting the sewing company where Marty worked to interview her colleagues, hoping to identify someone matching the description of the driver. However, this lead turned into another dead end, as none of her co-workers could offer useful information or suggest who might have been driving the pickup truck. Detectives then shifted their focus to Marty's family. They spoke with Marty's mother, Shirley Roth, who provided a potentially valuable lead. Shirley revealed that her daughter had not been romantically involved with anyone since divorcing her ex-husband 7 years earlier. Despite their divorce, they maintained regular contact because they shared custody of their daughter. Shirley explained that, following the divorce, Marty had dedicated herself entirely to her work and children and had shown no interest in dating. In Shirley's opinion, the only person who seemed like a potential suspect was Marty's ex-husband. This lead warranted further investigation, especially since Marty remained unconscious and unable to provide information herself. Detectives continued to speak with family members to identify Marty's ex-husband. Their children were quick to defend their father. Their daughter, Mackenzie, a high school student, took offense at the suggestion that her father could be a suspect. She asserted that her father could not have done such a thing, describing him as calm, non-confrontational, and someone who maintained a good relationship with his ex-wife and children. Their son, Stephen, also rejected the suspicion, stating that his father was incapable of committing the crime. Despite this, detectives could not dismiss the theory and decided to investigate it thoroughly. The police then visited Marty's ex-husband at his home. He was fully cooperative, invited them inside, and answered their questions openly. He appeared deeply affected by the incident, expressing that he still cared for Marty and was distressed by what had happened. He expressed relief that she had survived and shared that he was praying for her recovery. Although there was nothing initially suspicious, the police still needed to verify his alibi. He told them that, on the morning of the attack, he had taken his daughter to school before going to work. To confirm his statement, the police spoke with his daughter, Mackenzie, who was living with her grandmother, while they worked on verifying the details he had provided. A DNA sample was taken from him, though analysis would require time. For Mackenzie, the prohibition against seeing her father created additional hardship, making this a challenging period for everyone involved. The police also collected DNA samples from under Marty's nails, along with hair follicles found on her clothing. After comparing this evidence with the ex-husband's DNA, all suspicions about him were completely dismissed. His DNA did not match, and his alibi was verified. As a result, the ex-husband was officially cleared from the list of suspects, much to Mackenzie's relief. The family was finally able to reconnect and support one another as they waited for Marty to regain consciousness. Meanwhile, Marty's family tried to piece together what had happened and figure out who might have attacked her. Her mother, Shirley, recalled that not long before the incident, the grandmother's house had been broken into and robbed. This raised fears that the entire family could be targeted by a stalker intent on carrying out violent acts. However, the police had no definite answers, leaving the family engulfed in fear and paranoia. They had no clue who the perpetrator could be and clung to hope that Marty would recover and reveal what had truly happened. The family also recalled that, shortly before the attack, a handyman had visited Marty's house to change the locks. This handyman worked for B&J Construction, a company her mother and grandmother had trusted and hired for years. Coincidentally, he was the only unfamiliar person who had interacted with Marty in recent months. This raised suspicions that the handyman, who often did repair work for the family, might be connected to both the robbery and the assault. The police turned their attention to Brian Pennington, the handyman who had regularly visited Marty's house, her mother's house, and her grandmother's house to handle household repairs and maintenance. At the time, Brian was 26 years old, married, and the father of 2 children. He lived about an hour and a half away in a small town called Leeton, Missouri, with a population of around 500. On September 10, 2010, detectives decided to visit Brian's home. When they arrived, they immediately noticed a broken red pickup truck in the driveway, which matched a description provided by neighbors of a suspicious vehicle. However, the truck did not have license plates, so they were unable to confirm the match. Inside the house, they found Brian, who was cooperative and permitted the officers to enter his kitchen. He answered their questions openly. When asked about the truck, Brian explained that he didn't drive it because it had no license plates. He also mentioned that his last visit to Marty's house had been 3 to 4 days before the attack, during which he had checked the basement equipment. Brian didn't contact the police after seeing on the news that Marty had been attacked. He explained that he didn't know anything and couldn't provide any useful information about the case. Brian wasn't very familiar with Marty. Their interactions had been limited to working together on repairing her house. Although he considered her a respectable woman, that was all he could share with the authorities. However, detectives began to question his account. Their suspicions were triggered by the fresh scratches on his face, which might have been caused during a confrontation with Marty. When asked about these marks, he explained that they were caused by a dog that had scratched him while he was playing in the yard the day before the detectives came to visit. He acted fearful when accused of being involved in the crime, insisting that he was incapable of such an act. Brian provided an alibi, prompting investigators to verify his story. When detectives spoke to Brian's wife, Jessica, they noticed her odd behavior from the outset. She appeared hesitant, seemed afraid to disclose the truth, dodged direct questions, and mentioned there had been tension in their relationship lately. Jessica stated that her husband had been at home that morning, sleeping in another room, and added that the last time he had worked at Marty's house was about a month earlier. She also corroborated Brian's claim that the scratches on his face were caused by a dog. However, her demeanor suggested she was not being truthful. Detectives doubted her account, and she was taken to the station for further questioning. Authorities suspected Jessica might either be an accomplice to the crime or trying to shield the killer. Before leaving Brian's house, the police asked him whether they would find anything suspicious if they searched the property. Brian confidently stated that they wouldn't find anything and even agreed to let them look around. However, in the laundry basket, at the very bottom, they discovered a pair of jeans with suspicious stains. Brian explained that the stains weren't blood but merely machine oil left over from working on a pickup truck. He allowed the police to take the jeans for testing and voluntarily provided his DNA samples for comparison. The items were immediately sent to the forensic lab, where tests confirmed the stains were blood, not oil. However, additional time was needed to extract the DNA profile and compare it. While detectives awaited the test results, Marty regained consciousness in the hospital 12 days after the attack. Although she was able to communicate shortly thereafter, her initial days out of unconsciousness were clouded by confusion. During this time, she experienced constant pain and discomfort. It's not surprising that Marty needed to take a large number of medications during her recovery. Her poor health may have stemmed from her reliance on these drugs, in addition to the severe injuries she suffered. Despite the extensive brain damage she endured, her memory remained largely intact. Marty informed the police that Brian Pennington was the one who had attacked her. She described that morning's incident as starting entirely normally. She woke up early, got ready for work, and followed her usual routine. Around 7:30 a.m., she heard a car stop in front of her house but didn't pay it much attention. Soon after, there was a knock at the door. It was Brian, who had worked on her house about a month earlier. Marty found his visit odd from the beginning. It was unplanned and too early in the morning. However, she reassured herself, thinking he might have been working nearby or had forgotten a tool during his last visit. Although she was hesitant to open the door, she ultimately decided to do so. The two had a brief conversation. Brian was polite and friendly, which helped ease her concerns. Brian explained that he had heard Marty was planning to sell her house and wanted to alert her to a problem he had noticed during the previous renovation. He insisted it was important and offered to show her the issue in the basement. Curiosity overcame her, and she agreed to follow him downstairs. She recounted that everything happened very quickly. Initially, they were just walking downstairs, but an unsettling feeling suddenly came over her. Brian grabbed her and pushed her down the stairs, causing her head to hit hard against the concrete floor. Brian violently attacked Marty, choking her until she lost consciousness. Later, Marty explained that her memories of the incident were hazy, as though she were trapped in a fog. She occasionally regained consciousness, only to lose it again shortly afterward. Eventually, a policeman arrived at her home, and she was taken to the hospital. Investigators needed evidence to support Marty's account. Tests were conducted on a pair of jeans found in Brian's laundry basket, which revealed traces of Marty's blood. DNA samples taken from beneath her fingernails also matched his DNA. Law enforcement officers obtained an arrest warrant for Brian and visited his home, but he was not there. The search for him intensified, and soon police in the city discovered a damaged red pickup truck. Jessica was behind the wheel, and Brian was sitting in the passenger seat, visibly disheveled. Authorities charged Brian with attempted murder and robbery, setting bail at $1 million. The news stunned Marty's mother and grandmother, who had been in contact with Brian for years and trusted him as a professional handyman. Brian frequently worked for Marty's family, completing various household repairs. Tragically, it was Marty's mother who had recommended him to her daughter, leaving her with a deep sense of guilt. The family struggled to comprehend this senseless act of aggression. Brian's cruelty seemed inexplicable, and no clear motive emerged. Although he provided no explanation for his actions, experts were left baffled by the sheer brutality of the attack. Doctors were amazed that Marty had survived at all. Brian's violence extended far beyond simply choking Marty into unconsciousness. He threw her down a staircase, causing her to land headfirst on a concrete floor, fracturing her skull. He continued his attack relentlessly, beating her and slashing her throat. Marty struggled to comprehend what she could have done to warrant such a terrible fate. After sustaining severe head injuries, she faced challenges with her balance, although she eventually managed to walk independently. Shortly after emerging from a coma, she developed visual impairments, along with hearing and cognitive difficulties. Her family noticed that Marty seemed like a shadow of her former self, but they remained hopeful for her recovery. At times, she would lapse into long periods of thoughtfulness, which deeply concerned her loved ones, especially her daughter. Doctors refrained from making a definitive prognosis. While acknowledging the challenges Marty faced, they emphasized that her survival against the odds suggested that recovery was possible. After spending about a month in the hospital, Marty was finally discharged. During her recovery period, she became closer to her 16-year-old daughter, Mackenzie, whose birthday occurred while she was still in the hospital. Mackenzie was deeply touched by a card her mother wrote for her, even though the handwriting resembled that of a child. She recognized the long journey ahead and understood her vital role in supporting her mother as she gradually healed. Marty faced significant emotional challenges after the attack, struggling to reconcile how someone she had trusted deeply could turn out to be a vicious criminal capable of unprovoked violence. Seeking solace, she turned to her local church for emotional support. Meanwhile, Marty's family was determined to ensure that Brian faced justice and received a lengthy prison sentence. The prosecutor's office had overwhelming evidence to press charges against him, including physical proof, Marty's detailed account of the attack, scratches on Brian's face, DNA matches, and items stained with blood. The only missing piece was a clear motive. Brian had neither attempted to abuse Marty nor stolen anything from her home. His actions were simply a deliberate and calculated effort to kill her while working in her house. This act of violence was sudden and seemed to lack any apparent provocation. Marty had no prior conflicts with Brian, and relations between him and other women in her family had been peaceful. However, as police investigated Brian's background, they uncovered a troubling history of criminal activity. He had been convicted in 26 separate cases, most of which were related to domestic violence. His ex-wife and former girlfriends had reported him to the police numerous times. Jessica admitted that she had shielded him out of fear of becoming his next target, as his behavior was systematically abusive. Brian frequently threatened her, exhibiting a clear pattern of cruelty. Jessica testified for the prosecution during the trial, stating that Brian was not home on the night of the attack. She explained that he had been away for hours and only returned around noon, after Marty was assaulted. Upon his return, His clothes were covered in blood. When questioned, he claimed it was machine oil but offered no further explanation. Jessica also refuted his claim that the scratches were allegedly caused by the dog, revealing that he had forced her to lie under the threat of being killed. She provided detailed accounts of their married life, describing him as abusive, both physically and emotionally. During the trial, Brian was visibly shocked when Marty appeared alive in court to testify against him. Jessica, his wife, also testified for the prosecution, presenting evidence that contradicted his statements. Moreover, none of Brian's claims were corroborated during the hearings. Jessica submitted cell phone records showing that, at approximately 8 a.m. on the morning of the attack, she had tried to contact Brian. Geolocation data confirmed that he was near Marty's house at the time. As the evidence against Brian continues to build, he has no viable path to acquittal. To avoid a prolonged and traumatic trial, Brian was offered a plea bargain. Although he could have faced up to 40 years in prison, the deal reduced his sentence to 28 years. However, on the day his sentence was to be announced, Brian unexpectedly attempted to withdraw the plea agreement and plead guilty instead. The court rejected his request, citing no valid justification for accepting it. During the final courtroom proceedings, Marty directly asked Brian why he had attacked her and nearly killed her, but he refused to provide a reason or make any closing statements. Marty is still recovering from the devastating attack, which left permanent scars on her face and neck. The injuries have distorted her facial features and affected her mobility. Despite these challenges, Marty remains determined and continues to train rigorously, believing she can regain her former self or even surpass it. In interviews, she often reflects on how someone only 26 years old could commit such a cruel act. Her resilience and self-belief have helped her heal from this violent incident, strengthening her resolve in the process. Marty returned to her routine fairly quickly and has become even more active. She took up kickboxing to learn self-defense, and sports have played a significant role in her recovery. She also created a website aimed at supporting others who have experienced traumatic events, using her personal story to inspire and encourage healing. In addition to these efforts, Marty continues to work as a designer for a clothing company, channeling her creativity into her art as a way to manage anxiety and stress. She credits her daughter, Mackenzie, as the cornerstone of her recovery and is deeply grateful for her unwavering support. Recently, Marty published a book that details the horrific incident that changed her life, with the hope of inspiring others to overcome adversity through resilience. She now actively works as a motivational speaker, meeting with various communities and offering the same support that helped her rebuild her life. As for Brian Pennington, her attacker, he remains in prison and is estranged from his family, including his mother, ex-wife, and children, who have all cut ties with him. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Clelia Medina. Early in the morning on Sunday, February 17, 2008, a man was walking with his dog when he suddenly noticed that the dog was attracted to something strange on the ground. Looking closely, he realized it was a series of drops forming a path. He began to follow them, moving parallel to the canal, not far from Lambersart, France. The drops continued, leading him to the very shore where he noticed a body half submerged in the water. It was swollen and very pale. The man immediately reported it to the police. In the name of law enforcement, forensic experts began to carefully examine the area and the body itself. However, there was nothing that could help identify the female victim. It was not possible to find a handbag that might have contained documents, a mobile phone, or bank cards. The body was taken for an autopsy, and the police continued to investigate the area around the canal for any clues about the identity of the victim. While the medical examiner was working in his office, detectives checked the databases of missing persons to find anything that could help identify the body. In this area, no recent disappearances had been recorded. When it became obvious that the unidentified victim could not be recognized, forensic scientists began searching the canal bank for clues indicating the identity of the deceased or the perpetrator. In the relatively small area where the body was found, cigarette butts and anything that could contain human DNA were collected. To ensure that nothing was missed, a team of divers was called in to check the bottom of the canal. This decision turned out to be correct. One diver managed to retrieve a car jack from the bottom, found just a meter away from the body. The jack, belonging to a standard set for a wing car, had a serial number indicating it was used in a vehicle produced in 1997. It had been in the water for quite a long time, so traces from its surface could have washed away. However, during the examination, human bloodstains were found. They continued to collect data. Initially, it was believed that the victim had been strangled, as characteristic marks remained on her neck. However, the forensic expert concluded that the cause of death was multiple strong blows to the head with a blunt object. The location and shape of the marks resembled those made by a car jack. There were suggestions that the girl could have died in a road accident, but the longer they attempted to prove this, the less plausible the theory seemed. It was soon decided to abandon this idea. It clearly indicated a methodical beating after which the body was simply thrown into the water. A toxicological examination showed that the victim was either intoxicated from alcohol or under the influence of prohibited substances. The deceased was fully dressed, and no signs of abuse were found. At the same time, there were no marks on her hands that would indicate she had fought for her life. The attack had likely come as a surprise to her, and she was unable to defend herself. According to the forensic expert, she died around 5 a.m. The police had only one clue that could help solve the mystery of her identity: a small stamp on her palm that had miraculously not washed away in the water. Such stamps are given to club visitors at the entrance, allowing security to recognize them without the need to check passes or flyers. Typically, these stamps are unique to each establishment and are not replicated. It was quickly discovered that the victim had visited the Buccaneer Club located nearby shortly before her death. Detectives arrived at the club, immediately spoke with the administration and employees, providing them with a description of the deceased. Two young men recognized the girl because she occasionally attended the disco, but no one knew her name. The detectives managed to access the recordings from the CCTV cameras. Thanks to that, the victim was identified. She had arrived at the club the day before she was found in the canal, apparently leaving Buccaneer around 3 a.m. and being killed by 5 a.m. What happened to her between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. remained unknown. The police spoke to regular patrons and staff in the hope that someone recognized her from the CCTV footage, but no valuable clues about her identity emerged. So far, no missing persons reports had been filed. The police were left with only one option to identify the deceased: to hold a press conference and appeal to the public through the media. Detectives provided a detailed description of the victim and showed footage from the club's CCTV cameras. Within a few hours, a woman admitting that she was the mother of 18-year-old Clelia Medina. She reported that her daughter had gone to the club about a day before these events and had not returned or been in touch. She immediately became concerned. Relatives and friends had no idea where Clelia might have spent the night. No one had seen Clelia after visiting the club, which caused anxiety and prompted her mother to search for her. Approximately 36 hours had passed when she managed to contact the local police station in Lille, but received the standard excuse that law enforcement officers did not want to waste time looking for a girl who had simply gone on a spree after the club and was likely spending time with friends or a boyfriend. When she saw a news program about the police announcing the discovery of a body and the terrible circumstances surrounding the tragedy, she initially tried to dismiss any bad thoughts about it possibly being her daughter. However, the worry persisted. She literally felt that something bad had happened to her daughter and feared that it was Clelia's body that had been found in the canal. She acted extremely worried and was very agitated, providing somewhat confused information due to her emotional state. Therefore, the police decided to verify the information with Clelia's cousin, who had been with Clelia that evening. The young man confirmed some of the details provided by Clelia's mother. He helped to clarify valuable information such as the clothing and piercing locations that Clelia had. The victim's identity was almost completely matched. Clelia's mother was notified of the coincidence and was invited to identify the body. All doubts were finally dispelled. The mother was shocked by her daughter's tragic death, and she immediately began to cry. She struggled to understand who could have done this, as her daughter was an ordinary girl who did not associate with problematic people. According to her cousin, they had planned to go to Buccaneer Club together, the seal of which was found on her hand. He described his relationship with Clelia as very friendly and warm. They communicated well, supported each other. That evening, everyone was in good spirits. From the very beginning, Clelia's mother had been worried about her daughter attending the party. She felt strongly that Clelia should not go. To calm her mother, Clelia explained that they would not be walking home alone and that everything would be fine. Despite the fact that her cousin took her to the club, he did not intend to stay there long. Clelia managed to reassure her mother by telling her that her ex-boyfriend, 19-year-old Julian Saley, was supposed to drive her home. The whole family knew him well and trusted him. Julian Saley and Clelia had been in a relationship for about a year, which had ended a couple of months before Clelia's death. As Clelia's mother noted, even after the breakup, they continued to communicate as friends. Law enforcement officers decided to check the records of telephone conversations, which verified that Clelia had indeed called her ex-boyfriend when she left the club. However, the police did not have time to visit his home, as he came to the station on his own initiative to talk to the investigators. Julian was eager to help because he was worried about what had happened. In his statement, he emphasized that Clelia had contacted him after he left the cinema. He promptly went to the club, where he picked her up in his car in the parking lot. They spent some time together at his house, but at about 4:30 in the morning, Clelia headed home. Julian believed that she could have been attacked during this time. The police immediately questioned why he did not drive Clelia home at such a late hour. He explained that it was only a short walk left to get home, as the houses were located close together. It was already getting light, he was very tired and drunk, so cannot take her home. Clelia herself did not want to impose on anyone and was not afraid for her safety. Unfortunately, Julian simply went to bed and turned off his mobile phone to avoid being disturbed. Until he woke up, he could not reach Clelia but did not think much of it, believing that she could be spending time with someone new, as there was no romantic relationship between them anymore. However, upon learning about the tragedy in the Medina family, Julian felt compelled to help with the investigation, so provided his testimony. The detectives, however, immediately suspected that he might not just want to help. Such behavior is often seen in murderers attempting to divert suspicion from themselves. Thus, they decided not to let him leave too quickly, hoping he would either incriminate himself or provide genuine assistance in the investigation. Suspicion grew stronger as Julian reacted very calmly to the details of the crime. He did not show any emotions when looking at the disfigured image, and he appeared neither upset nor shocked. His lack of reaction to the details of his ex-girlfriend's death, combined with the fact that he was the last person to see her, made him a person of interest to the detectives. It is known that in such cases, exes are often involved, who kill out of jealousy, resentment, or revenge. To establish or refute this, the investigators asked Julian to show them his car. The detective specifically did not mention the jack that had been found in the canal. He agreed to this request without hesitation. According to his confession, he arrived at the police station in the same car in which he had driven Clelia from the club to his home. The policeman went out into the street with him, and in the parking lot, they found a notch indicating the year of manufacture of the car matched the jack. As soon as the door was opened, they felt a very strong smell of cleaning products. The interior was excessively clean for a young guy. It seemed that a very thorough cleaning had been carried out recently. Nevertheless, Julian immediately justified himself by saying that he had bought a new car only 10 days prior, and the previous owner had cleaned it well before selling it. The police were most interested in the possibility of blood being present. Perhaps Julian could have attacked Clelia in his car or transported the body after the attack. When the mat in the trunk was lifted, they found several suspicious dark red drops that were collected for further analysis. However, none of these stains belonged to Clelia. Nevertheless, Julian continued to be considered the main suspect. It was believed that this was an attack based on passion, so the killer must have known the victim well. Furthermore, the make of the car matched the jack was found at the bottom of the canal. Julian seemed ideal as a suspect based on all the criteria. After, they found one valuable clue, a blood stain on one of Julian's sneakers. After examination, it was possible to prove that the blood belonged to Clelia, but it was not possible to date it with precision. Julian insisted that the stain appeared by chance when Clelia had a nosebleed about a month before the tragedy. However, his words could not be confirmed or refuted, so this evidence turned out to be indirect. Even Clelia's family was sure that Julian could not have done this. He had always been a very nice guy. Clelia's mother believed wholeheartedly that he was not capable of murder. She commented that Clelia was almost crazy about Julian based on his appearance. He was very kind, loving, and gave Clelia many gifts. However, their relationship was not entirely smooth. They often argued. Julian as an accomplished young man for his age. He grew up in a strict but loving family in Lille, France. From an early age, he was interested in sports, especially football, which he played with his father. He was not prone to violence and avoided fights, despite being in perfect shape. However, he was forced to drop out of school because of football, wanting to build a sports career, and simply chose training over textbooks. His parents supported their son's decision, especially since he was mature enough for his age. At the same time, they described him as charming but very jealous. They mentioned that he could become upset over a random photo of a stranger on the internet that Clelia was looking at. As their relationship progressed, Julian became more and more jealous. Due to such tumultuous dynamics, they eventually broke up. Despite the tensions, they continued to maintain friendly relations, and everything seemed normal. Except for the circumstantial evidence against Julian, there was no concrete proof. He was released pending further investigation. Then, Julian was arrested and charged with Clelia's murder. He spent about a year in prison, but his lawyer managed to get him released before his trial. Julian repeatedly appealed, claiming there was insufficient evidence to convict him, and was released on bail. However, this lasted until 2011, when his formal trial began. A rather controversial trial lay ahead. From the very beginning, the situation was tense, partly because Clelia's family had changed their opinion about Julian over the lengthy investigation period. They became convinced, based on several dubious facts, that the deceased's ex-boyfriend was indeed a criminal. Clelia's family now demanded punishment for the supposed killer. At this stage, it was necessary to assess the mental health of the suspect. In June 2008, Julian was visited by an expert psychiatrist who noted no deviations. Julian willingly made contact and described in detail the events related to Clelia. He admitted that there had indeed been several conflicts which ended in slaps to the face. Although he did not think this was normal, he justified himself, citing jealousy regarding Clelia and claiming that she had stolen from him multiple times. After the examination, the specialist concluded that Julian was completely in his right mind and capable of appearing in court. Tension was literally in the air. The defense team escalated the situation to the point where a fight broke out right in the courtroom. Several people were slightly injured, so the trial was postponed because of this unpleasant incident and the subsequent bureaucratic red tape. Everything was delayed for another year until 2012. From February 2009 until the start of the trial in June 2012, Julian lived with his paternal aunts near Paris. She immediately noticed how angry he was. At first, they thought it was connected to the slander against him. However, his discontent grew as the trial approached. Meanwhile, the Medina family accused Julian's lawyer of unnecessarily dragging out the proceedings, which only heightened tensions. The first witnesses began to speak at the meetings. There was a mutual friend of Clelia and Julian who recalled that all three of them had once been driving in a car together after their romantic relationship had ended. Julian had even started dating a new girl, who happened to be one of Clelia's close friends. This situation made she very upset and jealous. Despite their breakup, a conflict ensued between them, which even escalated to physical confrontation, they exchanged blows. At one point, Clelia even attempted to jump out of the moving car, but Julian managed to pull her back inside. By the time the car reached her friend's house, Clelia finally exited and continued yelling at Julian from the street. He tried to calm her down, but she simply waved her hand dismissively and left the scene. This friend was convinced this was not an isolated incident, as outbursts of jealousy and aggression were repeated throughout their relationship. In addition to this event, Clelia's parents recalled several instances during family vacations with Julian where he lost control. They once caught him walking around the apartment with a weapon. However, he had managed to convince Clelia's relatives that it was just a failed joke. They now understood the situation was much more serious. From the very beginning, Clelia had been in great danger. Another friend of Julian recounted an incident where, in a fit of rage, he began to choke one of his girlfriends. The once pleasant, sociable, and good-natured Julian was now portrayed as a monster capable of losing control at any moment. So, the change in the Medina family's attitude toward him did not seem strange. Julian had lied about the time. He told the police that Clelia left his house at 4:30 a.m. Detectives managed to track their mobile phones and prove that they were still together at 5 a.m., which is when Clelia was believed to have died. Subsequently, Clelia's phone unexpectedly turned off at 5:10 a.m. Previously, during an interrogation, Julian said that attempted to contact Clelia again but could not get a response. Detectives believed the call to his ex-girlfriend was made intentionally to create an alibi. Shortly thereafter, Julian's phone also turned off for several hours. Investigators suspected he deliberately turned off his devices to avoid being tracked. Despite all the circumstantial evidence against him, Julian continued to insist on his innocence. His lawyer argued that none of this evidence proved his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Throughout the investigation, detectives tried to extract a confession from Julian, but he steadfastly maintained his innocence. The pressure from authorities led him to feel embittered. He claimed that the persecution caused him to face difficulties in real life and to suffer from insults, unfounded accusations. Phone records revealed something intriguing. Julian's new girlfriend also tried to contact Clelia shortly before the murder. At first, she did not disclose any details as to why she tried to contact Clelia at all. However, in 2011, the girl spoke to detectives and made a rather dubious statement. According to her, she felt guilty that Clelia was dead. The reason for her fears stemmed from the fact that, as a close friend of Clelia, she was dating Julian. This clearly caused great discontent for his ex-girlfriend, who took every opportunity to contact him. On that fateful night, Julian's new girlfriend decided to act on her feelings. She did not like Clelia as such attention directed at the guy. She believed that this was the impetus for another conflict between the exes, which ended tragically. When the police received this statement, they were puzzled and decided to explore this new details. The application ended up at the station, and detectives tried to find out if it was possible that she was an accomplice. They insisted that Julian's new girlfriend may have unintentionally provoked the attack but did not pursue such a goal intentionally. According to her, she had been afraid to admit it because she feared her boyfriend's reaction. The neck of the deceased showed clear signs of strangulation, as if her throat had been squeezed with bare hands. Apparently, the victim could not have been killed in this way, so the criminal used a metal jack from the car. Although it was inconvenient, it quickly became the instrument that ended the innocent girl's life. The killer inflicted a large number of blows to her head and face, which proved fatal. The degree of cruelty was astounding. He broke her facial bones. The prosecutor addressed the jury, stating that leaving such a dangerous person at large was a crime. Despite the circumstantial nature of the evidence, the prosecution managed to prove the defendant's guilt. The prosecution's witnesses appeared scared as they recounted their experiences with the real Julian. The jury found Julian salely guilty of premeditated murder. As he left the courtroom, he turned to the victim's family and said something that sounded like a threat. From the very moment Julian found himself behind bars, he began writing endless appeals to challenge the sentence, insisting that he was a victim of bias and incompetence. Probably feeling his helplessness and unbearable situation, he even insulted one of the judges in writing, subsequently refusing to retract his comments, insisting he was a victim of governmental arbitrariness. However, all his requests were rejected. While in prison, he was involved in another incident related to his inability to control his aggression. Using a homemade sharpener, he threatened to kill one of the prison guards, whom he took hostage for several minutes. Julian was eventually overpowered and neutralized. Now, he remains behind bars. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Michelle Kitterman. When a person capable of betrayal appears in a circle of close friends, this clearly cannot lead to anything good, especially if a love triangle is involved. Lacey Hurst Pavek was born in 1974 in Tonasket, Washington State, a tiny town with a population located south of the Canadian border. Her family owned the largest and most popular restaurant in the city, which made them local celebrities. They were quite wealthy, everyone in the city knew and respected them, some were even afraid of them. According to eyewitnesses, Lacey always had trouble making friends. Many children avoided her because she belonged to a privileged background. However, this did not particularly worry Lacey. She had a narrow circle of trusted friends. In high school, Lacey dated boys but only experienced real feelings when she met a young man named Brandon. At least, that was her first love, which eventually developed into marriage. Unfortunately, this relationship did not last long. After some time, Lacey and Brandon decided to get a divorce, with Lacey being the initiator. They then began a fight for sole custody of their children. Lacey's influential family managed to provide her with the best divorce lawyer, and the children remained with her. According to Lacey, the reason for the separation was constant quarrels with her husband, although the specifics were never disclosed. Nevertheless, it was believed that her husband was a decent person who never raised a hand against her. After the divorce, Lacey got a job as a financial director at a car dealership, where she met a man named Danny Pavek. Danny was quite an attractive bachelor, well known in the city and a favorite among women. Many wanted to build a relationship with him, but he, by his own admission, was only interested in wealthy Lacey. Danny warmly accepted her and her children. Their relationship before the wedding lasted almost 8 years, and finally, Lacey had everything she had dreamed of: a family, a new husband, a home, and a career. Despite being very busy, Lacey always found time to relax with her husband, friends, or relatives. Danny was drawn to her cheerful life and willingly participated in various events. Among the regular members of their social circle were friends from high school, including one of Lacey's few friends, Tansy. Tansy was known as a party girl, which made her hesitant to make friendships. She was also involved in distributing illegal substances and loved to throw parties wherever she went. Tansy had a large circle of friends and acquaintances, also from the same town, Michelle Kitterman. She was born on May 12, 1983, alongside her twin sister, Danielle Kitterman. They was born into a loving family and initially lived in Richland, Washington. The sisters shared a very close relationship, and they also had an older sister named Melinda. Despite being born prematurely, the twins grew up healthy in Benton City, Washington, after moving there due to their father's work. Michelle was an energetic, independent girl who wanted to explore the world and build a career. While not particularly interested in family, she was open to having children. Seeking a better life, Michelle moved to Virginia and lived in Maryland for some time. This was during her work in the modeling industry, as her looks were noticed during her senior year in high school. She occasionally received good photography offers. However, everything changed on May 23, 2003, when Michelle, then 20 years old, found herself in a difficult situation. The boy she was seeing abandoned her when he learned she was pregnant. In 2008, the Kitterman family faced their first shock when the twins' father passed away after a long illness. By October of that year, Michelle decided to move back closer to her family. She had always participated in shows, performed in groups, and loved the stage, but what amazed everyone the most was her beauty. Her modeling career was gaining momentum, and many believed she had a bright future ahead until Michelle got pregnant. Initially, she planned to continue with her modeling career, but now her priorities shifted. She wanted to be a good mother. To stay afloat, Michelle began working part-time in various fields, such as being a waitress or a bartender. It was a tough period, but she eventually secured a job as an administrator at a local private clinic. Michelle was described as a very hard-working, kind mother, remained young, easy-going, and lively. In November 2008, Tansy and Michelle attended a big city party where Michelle caught Danny Pavek's attention. They talked all evening and found it hard to stop. By the end of the night, both realized they were in love with each other. They began to meet secretly despite Danny's marriage to Lacey. He would tell his wife that he was out with friends or working late, but in reality, he was with Michelle. He spent time with Lacey while at home, often stayed late after work, walking until late with friends. He had a wide circle of friends, and Lacey did not suspect that her husband could have an affair, as she trusted him completely. One day, a friend visited Lacey, hoping to catch her at home without Danny. She disclosed Danny's betrayal, which was a real blow for Lacey. However, she composed herself, understanding the small-town dynamics and how well-known their family was, amidst numerous rumors. Lacey expected that this was just another piece of gossip, but days later, Danny confessed. He revealed that he was torn in a love triangle and couldn't choose between the two women. He decided that revealing his secret relationship to his wife would help him break free from the emotional turmoil. Danny admitted that he had been seeing his mistress for several months. And shortly before these events, Michelle became pregnant, which added to the confusion. He shared every detail, including how he met Michelle at the party. He claimed that Tansy introduced them and was the catalyst for his subsequent betrayals. Obviously, he sought to absolve himself of responsibility for his infidelity. After his confession, Lacey threatened to divorce him if he didn't leave his mistress. However, during this time, Michelle was doing the same. She saw Danny as an excellent candidate for a husband and father for her child. Furthermore, Michelle hoped that this new relationship would help her achieve a stable life, which she felt was necessary for her happiness. Although rumors suggested that Danny did not work and lived off his wife, he found himself in a very difficult situation. Lacey demanded that he make a choice, but for Danny, this was a big problem since he liked both women. He had to decide whether to continue living in a marriage with his wealthy wife and children or to leave for his beautiful young mistress. Several days passed during which he shared his internal conflict with friends, claiming that he had decided to leave his family and was going to tell his wife. Lacey was desperate not to lose her beloved husband and was willing to do whatever it took to keep him. On March 1, 2009, a woman contacted the police station of a neighboring city, reporting that she had found the body of a girl who was covered in blood. When the police arrived, they found the deceased in terrible condition on a deserted road in a remote area of the city. The girl was half naked, lying on her jacket, and covered in blood. Her hair was tangled in the barbed wire of a fence along the road. Initially, the cause of death was unclear. Detectives believed that the girl could have gotten lost, was frozen and disoriented due to hypothermia. She might have fallen onto the barbed wire. The police suspected intoxication or the use of illegal substances, but subsequent toxicological examinations did not confirm these suspicions. Further analysis revealed that she was a victim of murder. The unidentified body showed no signs of life and had extensive injuries. The forensic expert counted 39 stab wounds that were unusually shaped, clearly not inflicted by a simple kitchen knife. The victim received deep stab wounds from a weapon resembling an ice pick. These peculiar wounds were concentrated in the neck and abdomen areas, with a large amount of blood around the body, indicating that the victim had put up significant resistance. Identifying the body proved difficult since documents were not found with her. Witnesses insisted that the girl was not a local resident. The only valuable clue was a tattoo on the deceased's body. The police photographed the tattoo and began checking missing persons reports from nearby cities. One of the first cases that caught the detectives' attention was a report from Michelle Kitterman's mother. When shown a photograph of the tattoo, She immediately recognized her daughter, making it evident that the deceased was Michelle, who was in the early weeks of her pregnancy. Condition of the body indicating a personal motive from the killer, possibly jealousy, revenge, or insult. The nature of the injuries suggested that they were likely inflicted by more than one person. The investigators concluded that the crime had likely been committed by a group. Consequently, the police began to investigate Michelle's immediate social circle to understand who could have perpetrated this brutal attack. In their inquiries, they spoke extensively with Michelle's loved ones. Tracy, in particular, mentioned Danny Pavek when asked about Michelle's complicated relationships. She was aware of the love triangle in which Michelle found herself and knew about her daughter's pregnancy. Michelle had expressed her desire to keep the baby and to pursue a life with Danny, aiming to take him away from Lacey, who he had been seen on the side for several months. Despite the fact that he had the same motive for the murder, wanting to get rid of the annoying mistress and save his marriage with a wealthy wife, this version of events needed to be checked. The investigators first went to the house where he lived with his wife and children. Contrary to expectations, Danny had an alibi during the attack. He was at home with his wife. Lacey was also questioned. She was at home when the police arrived, behaved very calmly, and admitted that she knew about her husband's affair and that his mistress was pregnant. Lacey did not hide her distress over these facts but insisted that they were working on their marriage and trying to save it, that she had nothing to do with Michelle's murder. The detectives didn't notice anything suspicious, so they were forced to leave empty-handed. The police continued their investigation, needing to talk to a dozen more people from the deceased's closest circle of friends. 2 days later, Lacey called the station and admitted that she had a theory about who could be guilty of this bloody massacre. She referred to Tansy. According to Lacey, Michelle had been planning to report Tansy to the police for selling illegal substances for a long time. Lacey believed that Michelle was a police informant, giving Tansy a good reason to get rid of her. However, she could not provide any confirmation of this. This information needed to be checked. Before the police had time to investigate Lacey's claims, another call came into the station. A young man contacted them, saying that he had information for the police but would only share it if he was provided protection. He was seriously afraid for his life because the killers were dangerous people and would inevitably take revenge upon learning what he was going to do. The caller knew that not long ago, a girl had been beaten to death with an ice pick. Since no information about the murder weapon had been published, it was obvious that this was a valuable witness. The informant also referred to Tansy Mathis, mentioning that she sold banned substance and had repeatedly hired people if she faced any problems with her business. This allowed her to collect debts and remove unwanted competitors. The caller knew this well because he had once worked part-time as her personal security guard. However, he assured them that he was not involved in the attack, but he knew who they should investigate closely. According to him, Tansy had hired another individual known in criminal circles as Hollywood, who was supposed to deal with Michelle. The informant indicated that the ice pick had not been randomly chosen, it was provided by a man named David Richards. Of all the names mentioned, the detectives were most interested in Hollywood. After checking the databases, the police managed to locate a man named Brent Phillips, known as Hollywood. The alleged mastermind was arrested first. Brent was found in a rehabilitation center, where he was apparently seeking refuge from police persecution. He denied any wrongdoing, claiming to have had no idea about his actions and expressed that they had no serious motive to deal so cruelly with a pregnant young woman. Nevertheless, it was evident that Tansy was clearly lying because she knew Michelle. It seemed that the police had seasoned criminals in their hands who would not be easy to crack. Yet, contrary to expectations, just 4 days after the arrest, the alleged killer agreed to cooperate with the police. The reason for this, he claimed, was that he did not have enough money after the murder. The suspicions were confirmed. He had indeed participated in the massacre, but he had never been paid for the crime. After violating the terms of his agreement, he decided to cooperate and turn in the mastermind, hoping to receive leniency during sentencing. Brent said that he knew in advance what Tansy intended to do because she might not be able to manage on her own. Therefore, a strong accomplice was necessary. Tansy had convinced several more people in advance, telling them the story that Michelle wanted to cooperate with the police and would hand over the gang. On the evening of Michelle's murder, Tansy, David Richards, and Brent came for their victim, inviting her to go out for a supposedly fun night at a casino. Michelle, who knew these people well, readily agreed, falling into their trap. The group headed towards the gambling establishment, choosing a deserted road outside the city. Instead of going to the casino, however, they drove 50 kilometers away from the city and suddenly pulled over, suggesting that Michelle stop to smoke. She agreed, but after they stopped, they dragged her out into the snow and began to beat her with an ice pick. The first few blows to the stomach were made by Tansy, then she handed the ice pick to Brent because the tool was too heavy for her. Brent himself inflicted many more wounds on the defenseless Michelle. The overall story seemed plausible, but the investigators were still interested in confirming the details. Why was Tansy so angry at her old friend and her unborn child? The first blows of the killer were not made by chance, they were precisely aimed at the stomach, yet Tansy stubbornly remained silent. Analyzing the words of the murderer, the detectives quickly realized that the car in which the company was traveling that evening did not belong to any of them. Everyone had other cars. The brand was identified, indicating that the transport for this trip was rented, but they did not know from whom exactly. The detectives began to investigate the car and managed to find a receipt for the rental. The managers showed the recordings from the surveillance cameras, which indicated that Lacey rented the car in her own name. In addition, she worked there, so she was unmistakably recognized. This made her the main suspect as the jealous wife seeking retribution. Rumors reached the investigators that Lacey had repeatedly spoken unflatteringly about Michelle. She stated how she wished her husband's mistress would disappear along with the child. Naturally, she had the most compelling motive for committing the crime, but it was not possible to connect the daughter of an influential family with the bloody massacre, at least until investigators found her at the car dealership. So, Lacey added to list of potential suspects. Curiously, bail amounts of $1 million were set for the other detainees, which no one could pay, while only $250,000 was set for Lacey. Everyone thought this was connected to her powerful family, which especially outraged the victim's family. This decision was a real shock. Michelle's mother and sisters thought that this could be a conspiracy and that they were all in danger. Trials against each of the criminals began, starting with Brent's hearing on charges of first-degree murder of Michelle and first-degree assault on her unborn baby. Phillips was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 26 years in prison. At the trial, Brent admitted that Tansy turned him against Michelle by telling him that Michelle will report him to the police because he is involved in banned substance trafficking. A similar situation occurred with a third accomplice. The lie worked with all of this. Tansy was found guilty of first-degree murder and first-degree manslaughter due to the fact that the unborn child died. It was believed that she inflicted the deepest blows with an ice pick that injured the baby. In addition, she was charged with first-degree kidnapping and concealment of material evidence. The punishment chosen was life imprisonment without the right to parole. Furthermore, for all the crimes committed, Tansy received additional sentences under other charges, totaling 19 years. Tansy admitted that she had committed the crime at Lacey's request. While her accomplice David Richards, who provided assistance, received 17 years in prison for complicity in the murder. All these hearings went fairly quickly, but Lacey's case stalled from the very beginning. The lawyer insisted that she did not want to kill anyone, but only intended to intimidate the homewrecker. The murder occurred because the criminals could not control the situation. She continued to claim that it was Tansy who initiated the attack because Michelle planned to report her illicit activities to the police. Lacey removed all responsibility from herself, denying any connection to the criminal acts. Lacey's defense immediately went to work and repeatedly delayed the hearings, prolonging the defendant's freedom. This made the situation even more tense because Lacey had rented a car. What rich woman would rent a car for? All this raised serious doubts. Recordings of telephone conversations between the participants in the conspiracy were analyzed, confirming that Lacey and Tansy called each other many times on the night of the crime. This clearly did not happen by coincidence. Additionally, even during her initial communication with the police, Lacey openly expressed her dislike for Michelle and stated that she wanted her mistress to disappear from their lives forever. Interestingly, when the detectives decided to talk to Lacey's husband, Danny, who started this love triangle, it turned out that he was on the run. This went on for about a week, leading to an arrest warrant being issued for him. It was believed that he was also an accomplice in the conspiracy. At the time of his arrest, Danny Pavek was unemployed. While on the run, he got by with odd jobs. Despite plans to leave Lacey, his alleged complicity was never confirmed by the Supreme Court, which made the case quite confusing. Only a year and a half after Michelle's death, the trial of Lacey began on November 10, 2010. After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict against Tansy Mathis. She is charged with aggravated first-degree murder of Michelle Kitterman and first-degree manslaughter for killing Michelle's unborn child. In December 2010, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The very next day after the verdict was passed, Lacey filed an appeal, insisting that the prosecution was biased, her privacy was violated during the collection of evidence, and she pointed out other inconsistencies and violations, none of which were confirmed or were insignificant in light of the crime committed. Her last appeal was rejected in June 2012. Lacey remains behind bars at the Washington Correctional Center for Women. Tansy, David, and Brent are also still in the correctional facility. They will be eligible for parole in 2041. Lacey's mother wrote a book detailing her misadventures connected with her daughter's life imprisonment. However, this book did not achieve much popularity. Hello everyone. Today we will learn about another case. The case of Mary Catherine Edwards. Before the advent of modern DNA research techniques, building a criminal database was challenging, making the investigation and tracing of crimes less effective. However, recent technological advances have led to the development of sophisticated tools that can help identify criminals who have been on the run for years. Now, no one can evade justice. On January 14, 1995, the Edwards family had a planned gathering. Saturday dinners together were a cherished tradition for the parents and their 2 daughters. So, when one of the twin sisters, Mary, was missing, it raised immediate concerns. Mary Catherine, 31, did not attend the dinner and did not answer calls from her family members, who were trying to reach her from the restaurant. Frustrated, they decided to go to Mary's home in Beaumont, Texas, where she was living at the time. When Mary's mother arrived at the house, she became worried upon finding the door unlocked. Inside, they heard running water but received no response to their calls. The bathroom was flooded, and Mary was discovered unresponsive in distressing conditions. Her sister Allison immediately called the police to report that she had found Mary's lifeless body. The sisters were twins, raised in Texas, and were the only children in the Edwards family. The loss of one was a devastating shock. They had always been inseparable, kind-hearted, and dedicated to helping others, especially children. After graduating high school, both sisters pursued careers as teachers and worked at the same school. They were so similar that students and faculty often confused them. At the time of her death, Mary was 31 years old and thriving in her career. Known for her bright personality, her murder sparked widespread outrage and anger. Mary was cherished by her students, many of whom felt a close bond with her. Hundreds of children, relatives, and friends attended her funeral, with many students mourning the loss of a woman who had been a vital source of support in their challenging lives. Some were in tears upon hearing the news of her passing. Parents urged detectives to take action against the criminal responsible for the brutal death of Mary. The community was horrified by the circumstances surrounding her death. Mary was found handcuffed in the bathroom, indicating that she had been abused. The bathtub was filled with blood, showing that she had fought back against her attacker, as evidenced by defensive wounds on her hands and body. Traces of the assault suggested that it occurred in her bedroom, where evidence was found on the bedding. Investigators suspected that Mary might have known her attacker, as there were no signs of forced entry into her home. The townspeople, who knew Mary well, cooperated with detectives, eager to identify the person responsible for such a horrific crime. Given the brutality and circumstances, detectives focused their investigation on her close acquaintances, believing there could be a personal motive. It was initially thought that Mary might have drowned, but an autopsy revealed that her lungs did not contain enough water, suggesting that water only entered her lungs after she had died. The true cause of death was asphyxiation, as indicated by distinct marks on her neck, and injuries suggesting she had been tightly restrained with great force until she could no longer resist. Forensic experts meticulously reconstructed the crime scene by examining the victim's house, starting with the bathroom and then moving to the bedroom. They collected a significant amount of evidence. The most alarming item found was the Smith & Wesson handcuffs that the victim had been restrained with, which resembled those used by police. This discovery left law enforcement officials confused, raising suspicions about whether someone connected to the police or a security worker might have had a personal relationship with the victim. The emotional impact of the case was deeply felt by everyone involved. In the weeks following the crime, detectives attempted to trace the serial number of the handcuffs, but their efforts were unsuccessful. By this time, the primary suspect had shifted to David Perry, the ex-boyfriend of Mary. Even though Mary was attractive and sociable, she maintained a small circle of close friends and had a few ex-lovers. She dedicated most of her time to her work and her students, leaving little room for a personal life. It was discovered that David Perry was the only person who might have had keys to her house. This raised concerns that he could have been stalking her and visiting her home out of jealousy or revenge. David agreed to cooperate with the police and provide everything needed for the examination. While waiting for the results, detectives interviewed mutual acquaintances of the couple, and everyone described David as a completely harmless person, showing no signs of aggression. He had no prior criminal record, history of violent or abuse offenses. Additionally, David Perry presented solid evidence of his alibi. He was not even in town on the night of the murder, as confirmed by multiple witnesses. David fully cooperated with the investigation, voluntarily provided DNA samples, and did not exhibit any characteristics of a criminal. Forensic analysis confirmed that the DNA did not match, leading to his removal from the list of suspects. Unfortunately, that was where the investigation stalled. Others in the victim's close circle also did not fit the criminal profile and had solid alibis. Although investigators had a lot of materials for analysis, the forensic technology at the time was insufficient to make further progress. The unsuccessful search continued for years. The situation changed significantly 23 years later, in 2018, with the introduction of a DNA analysis method that utilized genealogy. This method allowed investigators to find potential matches by examining relatives of the suspected. Law enforcement turned to the GEDmatch program, which collects DNA from Americans who voluntarily submit their samples, creating a large database. This database was instrumental in solving long-standing unsolved cases. When Detective Brandon Bess was advised to revisit the old cases, he immediately recalled the unsolved murder of Mary Edwards, which had troubled him for years. In April 2020, DNA samples from the scene related to Mary were sent to a lab at Othram for analysis. Here, many matches were found with the relatives of the killer. This marked the beginning of building a family tree related to the suspect. The number of names that needed analysis was overwhelming, totaling several thousand individuals. At this point, the detective's wife, who had a keen interest in genealogy, decided to assist with the investigation. She dedicated her free time to carefully examining matches from this extensive list. This task required precision, as each name needed to be evaluated accurately to ensure their efforts were worthwhile. Additionally, the investigators reviewed the diaries of Mary, They was believed that the victim may have had an obsessive admirer who harmed her out of unrequited love. Despite a thorough examination of the diary entries following the crime, no significant leads were uncovered. They then chose to cross-reference the names mentioned in the diaries with those in the genealogical records. During this process, the surname Lapointe began to come to light. The first identified relative of the murderer was Shara Lapointe. When contacted, Shara revealed that she is a well-known expert in genealogy and genetics. With decades of experience in her field, Shara had previously worked on challenging cases. Notably, she successfully identified one of the women buried along a state highway in the infamous Texas Fields of Death. Now, she was eager to apply her expertise to help solve other crimes, including the mystery surrounding Mary Edwards's death. She was prepared to assist with the investigation, even though it meant examining her own family members, which could lead to unsettling discoveries. As she began her analysis, she felt a sense of dread while checking the backgrounds of her own siblings, aware that the results might have serious implications. She needed to review about 7,500 names. Each individual on this list was examined slowly, requiring her to gather and process information about them and their relatives before either adding them to the family tree or discarding them. This process took several hours for each person. Over 3 months, detectives and Shara Lapointe devoted all their free time to searching for the criminal. Eventually, they found a promising lead, a couple living in Beaumont who matched the profile of the murderer's family. They have 2 sons who attended Forest Park High School, the same school Mary attended as a child. This led to 2 main suspects, Michael Foreman and Clayton Foreman. Michael did not match the age profile for the time of the crime. After checking, he was found to have no criminal record or history of aggressive behavior, so he was quickly ruled out as a suspect. Clayton's situation was different. He had known Mary Edwards from high school and was closer in age to her. Furthermore, he had a criminal record for abuse, making him a strong suspect. In 1981, a 19-year-old girl reported to the police that Clayton Foreman had tied her hands and abused her. The details of that crime were strikingly similar to the incident involving Mary that occurred nearly 15 years later, with the key difference being that the first victim survived. She had also attended Forest Park High School, while Clayton was a manager at that time. The incident was effectively concealed, leading to Clayton receiving a suspended sentence and a fine. At that time, there were no police databases containing DNA samples, and he was not required to provide any. This lack of evidence is why Clayton was not identified during the investigation into the death of Diana Coe, his girlfriend of 3 years, with whom he had been planning to marry. Although Diana described him as a nice guy, it seems she did not truly know him. Less than 3 months before their wedding, she discovered the details of his abuse charge, the suspended sentence, and the fine, prompting her to want to end their engagement. However, Clayton, a manipulative liar, convinced her that it was all a misunderstanding. He avoided discussing the issue but created a believable narrative. Diana, eager to believe him, prioritized her relationship over her safety, which turned out to be a mistake. They went ahead with the marriage despite warnings from her family. When Diana and Clayton were married for just over 11 years, Diana claimed that Clayton frequently lied about his significant financial issues. She also observed that he had an unusual obsession with police handcuffs and law enforcement tools, even hanging a pair of handcuffs from the rearview mirror of his car. By the time Mary was killed, Diana had already divorced Clayton. She recalled calling him in tears to share the news, but she was taken aback by his indifferent response. He continued the conversation as if nothing had happened and then hung up. It became evident that he was likely not overly concerned about the situation. He was probably connected to the events that had transpired. The suspect was now 60 years old and no longer lived in Beaumont. He had been located in a small town called Reynoldsburg, Ohio, which had a population of a few thousand. At that time, Clayton was working as a driver. Investigators were able to find his address and all necessary information. Now they needed to collect his DNA for analysis. They set up surveillance on the suspect's house. A local police officer even took his trash, which was sent to a forensic lab. DNA from Clayton was discovered on a beer bottle found in the garbage. The match was nearly 100%. A significant finding indicated that the investigation was nearly complete after all these years. The next step was to confront the suspect. The detectives in charge of the case traveled to Ohio and devised a plan to lure Clayton into a trap. Since he was a driver, they decided to approach him about a fictitious lost item that a client was supposedly searching for. On April 29, 2021, Clayton was summoned to the police precinct under the pretense of discussing a lost wallet. He agreed to come in voluntarily. For the first time in 26 years since a brutal murder, the suspected perpetrator was in the interrogation room. The detectives informed him about the murder of Mary Edwards. This news shocked him, but Clayton attempted to maintain his composure and initially denied knowing her. The detectives then showed him a wedding photo of his first wife, which included Mary and her twin sister as bridesmaids. This reminded him that Mary had indeed attended his wedding, as his wife had invited her. From the beginning, Clayton became visibly nervous as the detectives bombarded him with questions, revealing inconsistencies in his story. The detectives focused on his vulnerabilities, hoping to obtain a confession. Clayton insisted that he was unaware of Mary's death and claimed he had never been to her house. However, these statements were quickly refuted by his ex-wife. Despite the evidence, Clayton continued to deny any connection to Mary, which seemed to be a defensive reaction. He also denied having had intimate relations with her, but this was proven false when DNA samples matching his were found on her body. The realization that his DNA was discovered on her underwear and body left him bewildered. When he was arrested for the murder of Mary Edwards, he insisted on having a lawyer and stopped cooperating with the investigators. In a symbolic gesture of victory in this long-standing case, Clayton Foreman was handcuffed with the same type of cuffs that had been found on Mary. On March 12, 2024, over 29 years after the murder of Mary, Beaumont prosecutor Patrick Knauth and colleagues Mike Laird, Sonny Eckhart are ready to go to trial. The absence of a lawyer limited his options. Weak attempts to invoke the statute of limitations were unsuccessful. Clayton Foreman remained obstinately silent, neither confessing to the murder nor defending himself in court. For everyone involved in the investigation, emotions ran high. Cheryl LaPointe worried that the Clayton's family would resent her for participating in Clayton's arrest. Nevertheless, she received support, with others expressing concern for her safety leading up to the court hearings. Shara felt it was her duty to uncover the truth behind the cold-blooded murder, regardless of the personal costs. One of the key witnesses for the prosecution was the twin sister of Mary, Allison, who emotionally recounted how Clayton took away the person she loved most. Even after many years, she still bore a striking resemblance to her sister. During the trial, the prosecution brought in experts in genealogy and genetics, along with forensic laboratory specialists, to explain advanced DNA analysis techniques to the jurors. It was crucial to demonstrate that relative matching methods were reliable. The prosecution also focused on women who had been impacted by Clayton's actions. One of his former colleagues testified, sharing her observations of Clayton's unusual interest in police items at work. As his subordinate who handled documents, she often opened his desk drawer and found a pair of handcuffs. Although she found this odd, she didn't feel comfortable asking him about it, thinking it was just one of his quirks. The defendant's last wife shared how she discovered many dress-revealingly photos of underage girls. When she confronted Clayton about them, he responded calmly, saying he needed them to fantasize about taking away their innocence. He then laughed, dismissing it as a failed joke. Despite these disturbing revelations, Clayton continued to evade justice. One of his victims, Diana Coe, also attended the trial. She believed in his guilt and testified for the prosecution. It was during this time that she learned about another victim and realized the full extent of her ex-husband's cruelty. However, she pointed out that during their 11 years of marriage, he did not display such behaviors during their intimate moments and never crossed reasonable boundaries in their relationship. The first victim of Clayton's assault provided a detailed testimony about her experience. At the time, she was 19 years old and just months away from his wedding to Diana. One night, while driving home along a dirt road, her car got stuck. Suddenly, a civilian car pulled up, and a man claiming to be a police officer got out to offer her help. Feeling helpless, she accepted his assistance. However, as she stepped out of her car, he attacked her, tied her hands behind her back, and threatened her with a knife, saying he would slit her throat if she resisted. Clayton abused her. Surprisingly, afterward, he became more gentle, even driving her home. During the ride, he asked her not to cry, tried to comfort her, and expressed remorse for what had happened, claiming he didn't want to hurt her. This sudden shift in his demeanor was unsettling, especially considering the violent behavior he had just exhibited. At that time, she reported the incident to the police, but she was fearful. In court, she mentioned that she had forgiven her attacker and harbored no resentment towards him. She did not wish to harm Clayton. She believed he truly regretted his actions and would not reoffend. This perspective contributed to the light punishment he received. Now the first victim feels guilty, thinking that if Clayton had been imprisoned, it might have prevented the murder of Mary. Additionally, another victim testified against the defendant in court. Previously, she had been too afraid to contact law enforcement. This woman was also a friend of Diana, with whom she had stayed in touch during school. According to her testimony, Clayton attacked her one evening in 2006 while she was living alone in her apartment. Their past friendship allowed her to communicate with him, and he initially appeared to be an ordinary guy until his darker side emerged. One evening, Clayton visited her apartment and revealed that he was struggling financially and having marital issues. He was convincing, expressing a need for someone to understand and listen to him without judgment. Feeling sympathetic, she let him in. However, once she turned her back, he attacked her, held a gun to her head, threatened her, and assaulted her. He also used handcuffs during the attack. After it was over, Clayton surprisingly softened, apologized, and asked her not to report the incident to the police. She was scared, so she did not file charges against him. Following that night, Clayton did not reach out to her at all. It's important to note that his assaults were strikingly similar to a situation that could have occurred with Mary Edwards. Unlike previous victims, however, Mary fought back against his attack. The prosecution's witnesses testified for 7 days, while the defense presented no evidence. The defense attorney claimed that although Clayton might be an abuser, there was no proof that he was also a murderer. The defense suggested that Clayton's limited options might have influenced the situation. They acknowledged incidents involving other women, stating that Clayton typically did not act aggressively towards his wives, except for his fetish involving handcuffs. After hearing the prosecution's arguments, the jurors went to deliberate. They found Clayton Foreman guilty of murdering Mary Catherine Edwards. He received a life sentence. Clayton is eligible for parole in 2061. By then, he will be 101 years old. The jurors stated that it was not merely the testimonies from the traumatized women that led to their decision. Rather, it was the forensic experts' analysis of DNA evidence showing a nearly 100% match with Clayton Foreman's DNA that confirmed their conviction. The experts provided such a thorough explanation of the principles of modern forensic methodologies that it was difficult to find more convincing words. The convict also refused to admit his guilt until the end, even in the face of evidence regarding the abuse. Naturally, against this background, he never revealed the details of his heinous crime. Nevertheless, there remained even more horrifying questions. For many years, Clayton managed to skillfully hide his malicious nature from everyone around him. even from the women he lived closely with. Most people around him had no idea that he was capable of murder. Authorities suspected that he might have been involved in a significantly larger number of bloody crimes that remained unsolved. Clayton Foreman is in state prison. He will be eligible for parole in 2061, of course, if he lives that long. He continues to keep silent, while authorities do not lose hope that he will eventually reveal his secrets. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom. Christopher Newsom was born on September 21, 1983, in Knoxville, Tennessee, to Hugh and Mary Newsom. He was often called Chris by his friends and family. He attended Halls High School. There, he joined the baseball team, where he showcased impressive skills and teamwork. In 2002, he enrolled in Pellissippi State Technical Community College, a community college, to study carpentry. During this time, he met Shannon Christian, a beautiful girl who captivated him at first sight. Shannon was born on April 29, 1985, in Nacogdoches, Texas. Shannon, known for her beauty and kind nature, they developed a close relationship with each other. In 1997, the Christian family moved to Tennessee. Shannon graduated from Farragut High School in 2003 and then enrolled in the sociology program at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. During this time, she actively supported Christopher by attending his baseball games and traveling with him. They were often described as inseparable. Although they still lived with their parents, they dreamed of a future together. In the city of Knoxville, there lived a man named Lamarcus Davidson, who was originally from Memphis and was born on June 13, 1981. His childhood and teenage years were challenging. His mother struggled with severe substance addiction, and his father was an alcoholic. Lamarcus had a half-brother named Latalvis Cobbins. At the age of 16, Lamarcus had a chance to change his life but chose to pursue a criminal path, which quickly led him to prison. After prison, instead of turning his life around, Lamarcus began dealing illegal substances and became involved with a girl who was also entrenched in the banned substance. Unfortunately, Latalvis faced a similar fate. In 2003, Latalvis was convicted of attempted robbery in the third degree and served time. He was released on August 5, 2006, and moved to Knoxville, where he rented a room in a run-down house in the industrial area of the city. Lamarcus also tried to locate Latalvis, who was dating Vanessa Coleman. Lamarcus set off on a journey with his girlfriend. They arrived in Knoxville in early 2007. On January 5, Lamarcus and his girlfriend had a serious argument, which escalated to him hitting her. The next day, she chose to leave. On Saturday, January 6, 2007, Shannon and Christopher had plans for dinner and a party. Before meeting up, Shannon stopped by her friend's house to help her with makeup, hair, and outfit selection. They parted ways around 8 p.m., and Shannon began waiting for Christopher, who was coming from another part of town. At the same time, Lamarcus, along with his two friends George Thomas and Eric Boyd, formed a dangerous trio that arrived at Latalvis's place with a sinister plan. During their drive, they used banned substances and talked. Around midnight, Christopher and Shannon went to the parking lot of the apartment complex. Shannon got behind the wheel of her Toyota pickup, while Christopher leaned over next to her, keeping the door open. They shared a kiss. Suddenly, armed bandits appeared and attacked them. The criminals forced the frightened couple into the back seat of the truck and drove them to a rented house. Both Shannon and Christopher had their hands tied behind their backs. Later, it was revealed that Eric had distanced himself from the gang at that time. The next morning, January 7th, Shannon's mother, Dina Christian, woke up feeling uneasy because Shannon had not returned home and wasn't answering her phone. Dina's worry increased when Shannon's best friend called to say the couple hadn't shown up at the party. So, Dina contacted the rescue service. Realizing that the kidnapping victims were adults and that the authorities were not taking action, the families of them people decided to search for their children on their own. That evening, Lamarcus arrived at Daphne's house, his girlfriend, driving Shannon's car and wearing Christopher's sneakers, which were clearly too small for him. Daphne noticed these details and asked him to take her to the rented house so she could pick up her belongings, including clothes and cosmetics. When Daphne arrived, she saw Latalvis and George Thomas. They informed her that they couldn't get her belongings at that moment. Daphne was not allowed to enter the kitchen or the bedroom where Latalvis was currently holding Shannon. Feeling frustrated, Daphne left. Meanwhile, Shannon and Christopher were enduring a horrific ordeal. After being subjected to various forms of torture, Christopher was taken to the railroad tracks, dressed only in a shirt and underwear. They forced him to walk barefoot, blindfolded, with his hands bound and gagged. Suddenly, loud gunshots rang out, attacking Christopher in the neck and back. He did not die immediately, but the third attack to his head was fatal. Afterward, the attackers poured gasoline on him and set him on fire. Upon returning to the house, they subjected Shannon to abuse, which was incredibly brutal and lasted for several hours. They then bound her, put her in a garbage bag, and covered her with sheets. She was slowly dying from lack of oxygen. On January 8th, the burnt body of a man was discovered near the railroad tracks, and an examination confirmed it was Christopher. The investigators tasked with informing his mother, Mary. They had to caution her that the condition of the body would be horrifying. Nevertheless, she insisted on identifying him at the morgue. Mary placed her hand on the body bag and whispered to her son. The criminals left the rented house, and Lamarcus chose to stay at Daphne's for a few nights. He claimed that his brother had suddenly disappeared with the apartment keys, making it impossible for him to get inside. Although Daphne was skeptical at first, she eventually believed him. Meanwhile, the other accomplices, Latalvis, Vanessa, and George returned to Kentucky. In her personal diary, Vanessa wrote about how exciting her life had become and the new experiences she had gained recently. On January 9th, police officers arrived at a rented house where a tragic incident had occurred. Inside, they found Shannon's lifeless body, which was sent for examination. The doctors concluded that both victims had suffered greatly. A corrosive chemical substance was found in Shannon's throat, on her body, and in the area of her injured genitals, indicating that she had been tortured while alive. Investigators also conducted a thorough examination, and the first thing that caught the investigators' eyes was that the floor was covered in dirt. Furthermore, a pack of cigarettes was found in the living room, even though neither Shannon nor Christopher smoked. Finally, the agent stumbled upon an envelope, and after it was subjected to a fingerprint analysis, it was linked to Lamarcus. He had been involved in numerous crimes and had a criminal record. The detectives had no trouble determining his place of residence. The police department learned about the situation and intended to speak with Lamarcus first. However, he had fled. He made a critical mistake by calling Eric, which agents overheard and recorded. They also located Daphne and convinced her to assist with the investigation. During her first interrogation, a frightened Daphne shared everything she knew and mentioned that Lamarcus had pleaded with her to believe in his innocence. The detectives recorded everything on video, showing the disarray in the apartment. In addition to important shell casings, experts found video recordings, Christopher's shoes, binoculars, and a discharged .22 caliber revolver that matched the weapon used to kill Christopher. The case gained significant attention, reaching beyond the state, prompting the involvement of federal agents. Crucial information emerged about the video found in the apartment. It had been rented from a library in Kentucky by George Thomas. Meanwhile, the police needed a strategy to approach Lamarcus and decided to start with Eric. Finding Eric was straightforward, and within hours, he was located and arrested. His attempts to shift the blame onto others failed due to the strong evidence linking him to the crime. That same day, Vanessa and Latalvis was also arrested. On January 12, 2007, Shannon's family made a public appeal seeking attention from the media while waiting for updates on the investigation. They expressed gratitude for the help they received in searching for the couple and organized prayers for the funeral. Unfortunately, due to the condition of Shannon's body, the family could not hold an open ceremony. All 5 suspects provided their accounts of the events, trying to blame each other, but they agreed that the attack was motivated by robbery. Eric was believed to be the main perpetrator and was also accused of knowing about the crime beforehand and failing to intervene. The other suspects admitted to being in the rented house during the incident. There was uncertainty about whether Vanessa participated in the violence willingly or was coerced. She was placed under protection, but after several interrogations, she eventually admitted that she actively took part in the attack. On January 25, 2007, a memorial service was held at the University of Tennessee campus to honor Shannon. A year later, a golf tournament was organized, and a victims' memorial fund was created. Additionally, scholarships were established for senior high school students from Shannon's alma mater. In memory of Christopher, Pellissippi College held an annual memorial baseball tournament at Halls Community Park. Halls High School has also awarded an annual scholarship in his name to the top baseball player. George, Latalvis, and Vanessa faced charges related to the case. Initially, they were expected to be tried in separate trials from May to August 2008, but Eric was federally charged in the U.S. District Court. On April 16, 2008, Eric Boyd was found guilty on all counts, including theft and concealing a fugitive's whereabouts. He received the maximum sentence of 18 years in prison. George's attorneys requested a speedy trial, arguing that there was no evidence linking him to the crime scene. Their request was granted, and the trial was scheduled for August 2008, but it was postponed to 2009. At that time, District Attorney Randy Mickles announced that if Latalvis and Vanessa were found guilty, the state would seek the death penalty. However, the trials for both Latalvis and Vanessa, as well as George's trial, were delayed due to leaks to the press about the case details. The defense argued that a change of venue was necessary to ensure a fair trial, but this request was denied by Knox County Criminal Court Judge Richard Baumgartner. He convened a new jury in Nashville in November 2008. The house where the victims were killed was purchased by a company and quickly demolished. The new owners planned to build a memorial for Shannon and Christopher on the site. By the end of August the following year, Latalvis was scheduled to stand trial. During his testimony, he admitted to lying several times during his interrogation but stated that he would only tell the truth now that he was under oath. On the first day of deliberation, the jury met for about 10 hours. The following morning, the verdict was announced. Latalvis Cobbins was found guilty of both murders but was acquitted of abuse assault charges. On August 26, 2009, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 2 months later, Lamaricus went to trial. A key piece of evidence against him was the testimony of a medical examiner who conducted the autopsy. Her detailed testimony about the victim's injuries left those in court in disbelief. A particularly shocking moment occurred and autopsy photographs were shown. The prosecutor's assistant fainted, leading to a brief recess during which Judge Richard warned that anyone who cried would be removed from the courtroom. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours and identified many new factors that increased the severity of the charges. These included the various methods used to inflict pain on the victims. Lamaricus Davidson was found guilty of first-degree aggravated robbery and first-degree murder. Additionally, he was convicted for his involvement in abuse assaults against Christopher and for committing violence against Shannon. The sentencing hearing began on October 28, 2009, at 9 a.m. and was expected to continue until Friday. The prosecutors aimed for the death penalty and called upon the victims' relatives to share their testimonies and emotions. Shannon's younger brother spoke about the importance of his sister in his life, while Dina, in a calm and measured tone, shared the devastating impact that losing her daughter had on her. Judge Richard described these crimes as some of the most inhumane cases he had ever encountered and stated that no punishment could be deemed sufficient for the murders committed. Jurors unanimously recommended that Lamarcus Davidson receive the death penalty on 4 counts of capital murder, 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of premeditated first-degree murder against Christopher and Shannon. Dina later stated that she and her family were pleased with the sentence, feeling that justice had been achieved. Hugh, Christopher's father, hoped that other court cases would result in similar outcomes. Meanwhile, the media continued to cover the situation, leading to new theories. Some people suggested that the crimes were racially motivated because both Shannon and Christopher were white, while their attackers were black. This sparked a rally organized by white nationalists, which prompted another group to protest against them. The protesters insisted that there was no link between the crime and the race of the victims, emphasizing that the incident started with the carjacking of Shannon. They also made it clear that they had no association with the rally or its organizers. On December 8, 2009, George Thomas was found guilty of all charges against him. The specific charges included 2 counts of murder with extreme cruelty and 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder. His case relied entirely on circumstantial evidence and witness testimony. The sentencing hearing occurred the same day and continued until December 10. The jury deliberated for approximately 3 hours and returned the sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole for each of the 4 capital convictions. Vanessa's situation became a significant legal challenge. Although federal authorities granted her immunity, intending to make her a key witness in a federal auto theft case, state courts did not agree to release her. They ruled that federal immunity did not apply to state charges of murder and abuse assault. On May 13, 2010, Vanessa Coleman was found not guilty of first-degree murder and the crimes against Christopher. However, she was still punished for her involvement in other serious offenses, including kidnapping, abuse assault, and murder related to Shannon's case. On July 30, 2010, she was sentenced to 53 years in prison. 4 years later, just as the victims' families were starting to heal from their trauma, a shocking development raised doubts about the fairness of the trial. In March 2011, Judge Richard, who had presided over the case, revealed that he was stepping down due to banned substance addiction. The state Supreme Court then upheld the decisions made in the cases against George and Vanessa and ordered new hearings. In the second trial, Vanessa's diary became crucial evidence for prosecutors. They aimed to show Vanessa's connection to the crimes that occurred that night, using statements Vanessa had written in her diary during the days leading up to Shannon and Christopher's deaths. This evidence raised significant questions about her claims of innocence. Despite this, Vanessa maintained that she had accidentally ended up in that house and was a victim of circumstances. Her lawyer argued that her diary entries were nonsensical attempts, suggesting that the torture and murder of the victims were irrelevant to her at all. He informed the jury that Lamarcus attacked Vanessa when she tried to leave the house and that he threatened her when she mentioned seeking help. On May 17, 2013, the judge ruled on a sentencing case, stating that it was the most complex and horrific case he had ever encountered. A new trial for George resulted in a guilty verdict, with the jury once again recommending a life sentence but with the possibility of parole. Shortly after, Supreme Court Judge Walter Kurtz upheld the jury's decision, sentencing George Thomas to 2 consecutive life sentences for murder and an additional 25 years for abuse offenses. While Christopher's parents were relieved that justice was served, they remained determined to hold George's accomplices accountable as well. They made every effort to contact him, and after 11 years following the tragic events, he finally disclosed details about his collaborators in various crimes. On March 20, 2018, a Knox County grand jury returned a 36-count indictment against Eric Boyd. He was transferred from a federal correctional institution in Yazoo City, Mississippi, and was held at the Knox County Jail, where he was being held on $1 million bail. Eric finally went to trial on state charges in August 2019. Co-defendant George Thomas testified at the trial of Eric Boyd. In exchange for his testimony, George was allowed to have his first-degree murder convictions reduced to second-degree murder, his aggravated abuse convictions reduced to aggravated assault, and his sentence reduced from life in prison with the possibility of parole to 50 years. Thus, on August 13, 2019, Eric Boyd was found guilty on 36 counts of murder and invasion of privacy, receiving a life sentence plus an additional 90 years in prison. Every year, the families of Shannon and Christopher hold a memorial walk to honor the couple. In 2022, many cyclists participated in the event, riding through the streets of Knoxville. This act became a meaningful show of respect for the grieving families, allowing people to express their remembrance and love for the victims. The organizers of the event announced their intention to continue the bike ride annually to raise public awareness about the tragic events. One can only hope that this tragic case, which took the lives of young people, will serve as an important lesson for someone. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Daniele DeSantis and Eleonora Manta. In 2020, Daniele DeSantis turned 33 years old. He was born in Lecce, Italy, and lived in a nice apartment in an affluent part of the city. Throughout his career in sports, he became a well-known referee for football matches. By 2019, Daniele had officiated over 130 matches during the spring season, demonstrating his success in the profession. Daniele was getting ready to officiate during the 2020-2021 season, but unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. At this time, his girlfriend, Eleonora Manta, was pursuing her own dream of higher education in law. Recently, she had won a competition that allowed her to enroll in the law faculty at the university, marking a significant milestone in her life. With this dream starting to come true, she decided to focus on her desire to start a family as well. Fortunately, everything was going well, as she and Daniele had been in a relationship for several years and were preparing to get married. They had much in common, sharing hobbies and reflecting each other's personalities. According to their family and friends, they rarely argued, were often seen as a joyful, energetic pair. It seemed that a bright future awaited this lovely couple. Daniele grew up in a loving family with both parents and two sisters. In contrast, Eleonora was raised by her mother, who had to care for her children alone after separating from an abusive husband who struggled with alcoholism. Eleonora's mother had a daughter and two sons from that difficult relationship. Eleonora lived with her family until early 2020 and was preparing to move out to live with Daniele. There was one complication: Daniele had previously rented out a room in his apartment to students from the local university. He needed to evict the tenant before Eleonora could move in. She initially planned to move in during the summer of 2020, but various organizational challenges arose. As a result, they set the official start date for their cohabitation as September. The evening of this incident would turn into a horrifying chapter for Daniele and Eleonora. It all started on September 21, 2020. Neighbors heard distressing screams from a woman. At 8:54 p.m., a local boy walking his dog noticed a strange man running out of an apartment on Via Montello. The boy caught sight of the man's cold, emotionless eyes and froze in fear during his brief gaze. The man fled the scene, and the boy hurried home to report the incident to the police. When officers arrived, they found anxious neighbors who reported seeing a hooded man escaping from a nearby apartment. In the stairwell, they discovered Daniele lying on his back in a pool of blood. He had died from multiple stab wounds. The door to his apartment was wide open, and inside, Eleonora lay injured in the hallway. She had also succumbed to her wounds, having suffered numerous stab wounds. Initially, the police considered that the attacker might have targeted them for robbery, as Daniele was well known and wealthy, making him a tempting target. However, as investigations progressed, this theory began to lose credibility. Several important pieces of evidence were collected at the crime scene, including cable ties, 2 bottles of bleach, a black surgical mask, and women's flesh-colored tights. That tight had a drawn, sad face on them, were stained with blood. A handprint found on the tights likely belonged to the attacker during the struggle. It was challenging to identify the assailant who attacked Daniele and Eleonora, but it was clear from the start that the attack was particularly brutal. The evidence suggested that it was not a robbery but a planned act. Detectives used witness accounts to create a sketch of the attacker. Thanks to a torn mask, several people saw him, allowing them to provide a detailed description of the knife-wielding criminal. Some residents glimpsed him through their peepholes. One woman saw him brandishing a knife while partially opening her door. Additionally, the boy walking his dog remembered the attacker well. He described him as a young man of average height wearing a hoodie and carrying a dark blue backpack. This boy also noted the direction in which the attacker fled, helping investigators begin their pursuit of the assailant. The killer hurriedly wanted to escape before the authorities arrived. Likely, this allowed the boy to survive the encounter. The victims' bodies were quickly taken for autopsy and forensic examinations. At this time, their families decided on burying them in separate locations. Daniele was honored in a farewell service at the Lecce Cathedral early on the morning of September 26, while Eleonora was laid to rest in her hometown, just a few kilometers from where the tragic events occurred. Eleonora's mother chose to dress her daughter in a wedding gown that she had intended to give her when Eleonora moved in with her boyfriend, as they planned to marry once she settled into her new home. Meanwhile, investigators worked diligently on the evidence and searched for the attacker, using the findings from the forensic examination. It was revealed that Daniele had suffered 38 stab wounds, while Eleonora had 37. This level of violence was clearly excessive for a robbery gone wrong, as robbers typically use 1 or 2 shots and do not spend time inflicting multiple stab wounds. The nature of the attack indicated that the perpetrator had specifically targeted his victims, suggesting it was an act of revenge or a crime driven by passion. The investigation into the murder focuses on Daniele and Eleonora's acquaintances, as there are suspicions of a love triangle involving them. However, it is difficult to believe that either Daniele or Eleonora had extramarital affairs. They were considered the perfect couple, deeply in love and planning to marry soon, making any theories of infidelity unlikely. Their upcoming move together was intended to lay the groundwork for starting a family, which contradicts the notion of a love triangle. Witnesses reported hearing Eleonora's anguished cries, during which she mentioned the name Andrea or something similar. This led investigators to search for men with that name, prioritizing those closest to Daniele and Eleonora. The next suspect was the deceased's best friend. When investigators checked Danielle's mobile phone records, they found that he had contacted his friend at 7:30 p.m. However, this friend had a solid alibi that was easily verified, so he was removed from suspicion. While looking into, the police identified a 37-year-old acquaintance of the couple, who quickly became the main suspect. He also had a strong alibi supported by multiple witnesses and video footage proving he was not at the crime scene during the attack. He also removed from suspicion. The police examined the entire list of names, but none of the men named Andrea appeared to be connected to the crime. The investigation reached a standstill, but this did not last long. The verification process took considerable time, but it was eventually revealed that the confusion arose from a mistake. The name was actually different. By this point, several days had passed since the murders. The Carabinieri were unsure who had attacked Daniele and Eleonora or why. They faced mounting pressure from the worried public. The precinct was inundated with calls demanding the capture of the criminal and the streets made safe. This panic led to numerous false reports about potential suspects that needed to be investigated. The investigation faced delays due to new information. The police discovered a student who had previously rented a room from Daniele before Eleonora moved in. This student was named Antonio DeMarco, not Andrea. The investigators decided to look into Antonio anyway. There was limited information available about him, but what they found was concerning. A witness at the police station, who knew Antonio personally, recognized him from a composite sketch shown on television. The man became another important witness and revealed that Antonio was studying nursing at the university. Unfortunately, at that time, Antonio was not living on campus, and the investigators could not reach him since no one knew his whereabouts. A significant breakthrough occurred during a second examination of the crime scene. Forensic experts found a handwritten note that had been overlooked during the initial visit to Daniele and Eleonora's apartment. This note, along with masks, bleach, and ties, outlined the steps the attacker planned to take against victims. The first step involved returning home, where a change of clothes had been prepared, along with the ties meant to restrain the victims. The note detailed plans to destroy evidence, included an alibi claiming the attacker would be at home during the incident. In reality, the attacker intended to go to the victim's house, having mapped out several routes to avoid surveillance cameras during the short time needed to reach them. The criminal had a mask and a balaclava made from tights to hide his identity. While he planned to attack Daniele and Eleonora, he did not specify his motive. After the attack, he intended to return home quickly to dispose of the bloody clothes, use bleach, and meticulously eliminate any evidence of the crime. The most comprehensive part of the note focused on avoiding police detection and leaving no trace. It included instructions for covering his fingerprints. He planned to handle other items only after ensuring he would not leave any evidence on them. The attacker allocated around 15 minutes to this cleanup process and set aside half an hour to completely erase any traces of the crime. The police discovered a list that helped them connect the last suspect to the double murder. Their next step was to locate Antonio and collect his materials for comparison. However, his whereabouts were still unknown. Detectives started to track the killer's movements after the crime by analyzing surveillance footage and gathering witness statements to reconstruct his route. Nonetheless, he was able to traverse part of his route without being seen. Detectives tracked down the murderer to a street just a few blocks from Danielle's home, where they discovered that Antonio DeMarco was living with several other students. The police located Antonio. They began monitoring him to collect his DNA, fingerprints, and ideally, handwriting samples for comparison with the note and evidence from the crime scene. He led a seemingly normal life, appearing unaffected by the incident, and mostly spent his time alone. He often visited various shops around the city, including a comic book store near his apartment. At the comic book store, Antonio paid in cash, which could have left his fingerprints. The money was confiscated and sent for analysis. Additionally, investigators obtained handwriting samples from Antonio by examining his university assignments. The analysis revealed that his handwriting matched the note found at the crime scene. With this evidence, the case against him strengthened, indicating his involvement in the double murder. At 21:40 on September 28, 2020, Antonio DeMarco was arrested. In the parking lot, he encountered two carabinieri approached him, prepared to draw their weapons. Instead of resisting, Antonio smirked at one of the officers and asked how long they had been following him, feeling a sense of relief at being caught. By this point, detectives were certain that Antonio was the murderer. They had no doubts about his guilt, but the motive for the crime remained unclear. At just 21 years old, Antonio was an outstanding student who had always presented himself well during his internship at the medical center. His classmates and colleagues would never have guessed he was capable of committing a double murder. The police were astonished to discover how effectively he had concealed his true nature. Antonio's mother was the first to discuss her son's issues. She explained that he had spent countless hours drawing since early childhood, often creating unsettling images. He was easily distracted from this activity and could sometimes panic if interrupted. His psychiatrist confirmed that he exhibited other troubling behaviors. As Antonio grew older, he changed his social circle. While studying, he chose to live with Daniele, who offered him a room at a good price. It was conveniently located near the university and close to the hospital where Antonio was interning. To Daniele, Antonio seemed like a respectful young man, and there were no red flags. For several months, their arrangement worked well. Antonio consistently paid his rent and was no trouble at all. When Daniele informed Antonio that he would need to move out to make room for Eleonora, Antonio handled it calmly. He mentioned that he planned to find an apartment closer to the hospital. Although he did not show any outward signs of distress, the news was a difficult surprise for him. He agreed to move out and returned the apartment key to Daniele on the agreed date. What Daniele was unaware of was that Antonio had made several copies of the key and held a deep resentment towards him. After his arrest, Antonio DeMarco quickly admitted to his crime. He revealed that he had intended to murder Daniele from the moment he moved in with Daniele. However, Eleonora's unexpected arrival disrupted his plans, forcing him to abandon his original idea of carrying out the attack. He had initially intended to strike while Daniele was asleep. Antonio stated that Daniele had never mistreated him, but he felt a growing dissatisfaction during his time in Daniele's apartment. He believed he harbored a lot of anger towards Daniele, which eventually led to an explosive outburst. This anger may have been intensified by jealousy over the couple's relationship. Throughout conversations with detectives, they observed that Antonio showed no remorse. He described the brutal double murder as if it were a normal, obvious act. Antonio claimed he arrived at Daniele's apartment that evening at 8:43 p.m. He first walked by the windows to listen and check if there were more than 2 people inside. If there were, he would have left, as he felt unprepared to confront a larger group. After confirming it was manageable, he used his key to enter through the bathroom while Daniele and Eleonora was having dinner in the kitchen. As soon as he entered, Daniele stood up to confront him. Antonio was wearing a mask made from women's pantyhose with a sad smiley face drawn on it. Antonio later admitted he planned to use this disguise for future crimes. Despite having a punctured lung, Daniele fought back fiercely. During the struggle, Daniele managed to tear off the mask, make Antonio fled without it, so witnesses were later able to identify him. Eleonora screamed and attempted to assist Daniele by trying to push Antonio away from him. In the process, she sustained serious injuries. Once Daniele was dealt with, Antonio turned his aggression toward her in the hallway, delivering multiple stabs. Antonio intended to leave a chilling message on the wall using red paint, representing the victim's blood, but chose not to do so. After committing the crime, he rushed into the street and accidentally bumped into a boy walking his dog before running home. Before entering the apartment he shared with other students, Antonio disposed of his bloody clothes and changed into a pre-prepared outfit from his backpack. In the weeks that followed, despite seeming calm, Antonio struggled with guilt and attempted to confess before being caught. One night, he wrote an email to his mother confessing to the double murder but ultimately decided not to send it. The police later discovered this unsent email on his laptop, but it held little significance as it wasn't seen as a formal admission of guilt. Interestingly, the email had 2 potential recipients, his mother and a doctor at a psychiatric hospital where he had been evaluated. Known for his mental instability and aggressive tendencies, but no one could have imagined the extent of his crimes. A notebook was found where he regularly documented his discontent with the world. He had very few friends and struggled to fit into society, leading him to seek the company of escort service in an attempt to escape his pain, but it proved ineffective. He longed to meet a normal girl and establish a relationship, but this desire turned into an obsession filled with disappointment. During his periods of distress, he became acutely aware of the relationships that others, including acquaintances and strangers, had. When he discovered that Daniele was in a relationship, Antonio experienced another emotional crisis and decided to channel his anguish into violence. In his diary, Antonio began crafting a gruesome script for an attack, complete with detailed accounts of torture and suffering. He portraying himself as a serial killer who inflicted pain on random people purely out of desire. Antonio explained that he started writing to express his suffering on paper instead of letting it affect his real life. On February 17, 2021, a request was made for a psychiatric evaluation. Antonio DeMarco underwent several assessments, and doctors concluded that he was sane. They diagnosed him with narcissistic personality disorder and other issues, but confirmed that he was fully aware of his actions during the attack. Consequently, Antonio was considered sane and fit to participate in the trial. Despite this, his lawyers continued to argue for his insanity and requested further evaluations, but these requests were denied. The prosecution presented compelling evidence of premeditation and careful planning, including statements made by the defendant himself. The judge even expressed his belief that if Antonio had not been apprehended, he likely would have become a serial killer, bringing violence to the streets. This viewpoint was supported by two psychiatrists who assessed his mental state before the trial. Forensic tests on items found at the crime scene, such as a mask, tights, and a knife, matched the defendant's DNA. Additionally, an investigation of Antonio's computer and phone revealed photographs of Daniele and Eleonora, suggesting that he had been planning the crime well in advance. Before going home, he messaged friends to inform them that they would never see him again, implying he anticipated being caught and imprisoned. On June 7, 2022, Antonio was convicted of double murder and received a life sentence. In November 2022, he received an additional 4-month sentence for possessing explicit photos of children on his computer. His defense team was unhappy with the verdict and pursued an appeal, which was granted on December 2022, resulting in a new trial. The defense argued that Antonio was insane and did not understand his actions during the murders. The prosecution's main goal was to prevent a potential serial killer from being released and to oppose any reduction of the sentence. In the end, the life sentence was reaffirmed. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Amy Mullis. Love triangles are among the most common causes of domestic crimes. This is a story about the Mullis family's farm in Ulville, Iowa, USA, a quiet and peaceful place with a close-knit community. On November 10, 2018, the younger Mullis children stayed home while their parents worked with their oldest son, Tristan, in one of the farm's pig barns. The family divided responsibilities among themselves to ensure everyone handled tasks they were best suited for. On that day, Tristan was cleaning the barn while his father, Todd Mullis, checked the electrical equipment. Tristan's mother, Amy, joined them a little later. When she entered the barn, she tripped over a bucket and nearly fell. Just a day before this incident, Amy had been experiencing health issues, including dizziness and pain. She had visited the doctor multiple times for similar problems. It seemed she hadn't fully recovered, yet she still decided to work. Noticing his wife's exhaustion, her husband suggested that she go home and rest. Todd mentioned that she could assist him later once he finished the main tasks with Tristan. Amy agreed but wanted to complete a small chore first. She intended to visit the nearby shed to retrieve a carrier for their animals, as they needed to take their cat to the veterinary clinic the following day. After Amy left, the father and son continued their work together. Eventually, Todd glanced out the window and noticed that the door of the distant shed was still open, even though Amy had been gone for quite some time. She should have returned by now with the carrier and closed the barn. Growing concerned that something might have happened, he worried that his wife might have fallen again due to her dizziness. He then asked Tristan to go outside and check what was happening. Perhaps his mother needed help. When Tristan arrived at the shed, he was shocked to see his mother with the tines of a corn rake protruding from her body. He rushed inside and realized it was critical. He immediately called for his father. Todd quickly ran to the source of the scream and recognized that he needed to act fast. He instructed his son to fetch the family pickup truck. Tristan was already skilled at driving and could navigate the property swiftly. While Tristan went for the truck, Todd attempted to help Amy and carry her out of the shed. The rake made it difficult for him to maneuver through the narrow space, forcing him to pull it out of her body. By the time Tristan arrived with the pickup truck, Todd had loaded Amy into the vehicle and quickly took the driver's seat. Tristan held his dying mother in his arms as his father called 911. The dispatcher received a call from a very agitated man who was shouting for help. Todd reported that an accident had occurred on the farm and that his wife was seriously injured. He explained to the operator that they had found her lying face down in the shed with a corn rake sticking out of her back. The corn rake had 4 straight, sharp tines designed to easily penetrate hay or piles of leaves, and unfortunately, they had pierced her flesh. While he was on the phone with the operator, Amy stopped breathing. The dispatcher instructed him to pull over and provide first aid. Following the operator's guidance, the father and son stopped their vehicle, laid Amy on the ground, alternated performing artificial respiration and chest compressions. Unfortunately, the resuscitation efforts did not have the desired effect. Todd took Amy to the emergency department, but there the doctors could only confirm the death of her. The police then called the father and son to the station to take their statements while forensic experts examined the scene. Tristan supported his father's account, which helped establish a solid alibi for Todd. Tristan firmly asserted that he had not taken his eyes off his father until he saw the rake protruding from his mother's back. He believes that a tragic accident has occurred. During the initial investigation, most of Tristan's account was corroborated. When Tristan and his father discovered Amy, she was still alive but unconscious. The police also interviewed Todd, who stated that he did not know how his wife was injured, as he was not present when it occurred. Todd speculated that she might have fallen onto a corn rake, possibly due to feeling dizzy. Although this explanation seems somewhat far-fetched, law enforcement chose to wait for the medical examiner's findings before drawing conclusions. The report arrived quickly, raising further questions. Notably, there were 6 puncture wounds from the corn rake, which was puzzling since the tool only had 4 prongs, meaning it should have left only 4 marks. The medical examiner noted that Amy had other injuries, including a bruise on her upper lip and several fresh bruises on her face. There were also similar bruises on her arms and legs, some of which appeared to be defensive wounds, suggesting that she had been in a struggle with at least one other person. There was no doubt that it was not an accident. It was clear that Amy had been attacked. Detectives began investigating the murder, and after new developments emerged, forensic experts returned to the barn to closely examine the scene and validate the coroner's suspicions. During the initial examination right after the incident, it was already dark, so the detectives needed to conduct a thorough inspection this time. Forensic scientists found several bloodstains in the shed, where Tristan had discovered his injured mother. There were small splatters on the chemical bags along the walls, on the floor, and on all nearby surfaces. The scene indicated a violent attack, as the blood had spread widely. This suggested that Amy could not have fallen onto the corn rake by herself, as her husband had claimed. She had been beaten with a farming tool, receiving 2 or 3 blows. The area where the crime occurred had been overall very peaceful. In the last 10 years, this was only the 4th murder. For this reason, law enforcement officials decided to seek assistance from state authorities, who had much more experience in solving such cases. Investigators spoke with the neighbors of the Malus family, who revealed that their marriage had long been troubled. Their spouses were experiencing difficulties, frequently argued, even though the husband was known to be calm and non-confrontational. This raised suspicions among the police, leading them to believe that Todd not be telling the truth. He had a motive, making him the primary suspect in the case. Consequently, the police began to examine him more closely. The tragic loss of Amy, a kind and vibrant person, shocked the local community. Many were surprised that a mother of 3 could find herself in such a deadly situation. Detectives began investigating the couple's personal life to find a possible motive for the murder. 5 years earlier, Amy had cheated on Todd, which shattered his trust in her. This betrayal led to a decline in their once ideal relationship. However, they worked through their issues, decided to try to save their marriage for the sake of their children. They attended counseling with a family psychologist. Amy left her nursing job at the hospital to spend more time with her family, help on the farm, where she took care of the plants and animals and managed the family's finances. She told her friends that she quit her job at Todd's urging to avoid new temptations. Meanwhile, Todd also made an effort to spend more time with Amy and their children. Despite these efforts, the psychologist observed that Todd could never fully regain his trust in Amy. Amy spent all her time on the farm, where Todd was usually present both day and night. As a result, Todd's behavior became much more controlling than it had been before. Later, Amy expressed her frustration, saying that her husband was practically monitoring her. They seemed to have reached an agreement about how they spent their time together, which Todd believed was a way to rebuild trust in their relationship. However, this situation became a major issue for Amy. She jokingly referred to herself as her husband's prisoner, she shared with her close friends. Todd even restricted Amy's friendships, deciding who she could communicate with and what interests she could pursue. One of the friends he allowed, Patricia Christopherson, noted that since 2018, Amy had stopped feeling joy in her marriage. Patricia claimed that even a year earlier, Amy had been unhappy, and her affair was a way to escape Todd's excessive control. Others in their circle suspected that Todd was involved in the murder. Several witnesses supported claims that Todd had total control over his wife and exhibited suspicious behavior. However, Todd presented a different narrative. He claimed that he spent nearly all his time with his wife and was very happy, asserting that there were no issues in their relationship. He stated that they had fully restored their previous harmonious and communication that they once had. However, during the investigation, it became clear that this was not entirely accurate. In July 2018, just a few months before the tragedy, Todd noticed changes in Amy's behavior, which led him to question her fidelity. He reviewed phone records and found that Amy had been communicating with another man, Jerry Frasher. Todd discovered around 120 messages exchanged between them and confronted Jerry directly. Jerry, who worked as an assistant on their farm and handled administrative tasks, denied having an affair, insisting that their correspondence was purely work-related. Todd was unable to access their message exchanges, which made him skeptical of Jerry's claims. He even contacted Jerry's wife, who reassured him that she trusted her husband completely and had no concerns about infidelity. This conversation seemed to ease Todd's worries, and he stopped suspecting his wife of any new infidelities. However, investigations later revealed that Amy and Jerry were romantically involved. Amy was having an affair again, which investigators believed could be a motive for murder. The police theorized that Todd discovered the affair, overwhelmed by shock, killed his wife. However, this theory was complicated by Todd's alibi. He had been with Tristan until Tristan went to check on his mother. Tristan claimed there were no arguments between his parents that day, and he had kept an eye on his father. Despite this, the police wanted to explore another possibility. Jerry Frasher might also have had a motive for murder. Jerry did not want to leave his family. Could he have killed Amy to keep his family intact? The detectives needed to investigate this angle as well. Amy often expressed frustration about Todd working too much, leaving her to handle various farm tasks that she disliked. She wanted to go out and enjoy life, spending more time in town. After trying to salvage her relationship, it became clear to her that she and Todd had significant differences. Jerry often visited the farm for work, where he interacted with Todd and Amy. Occasionally, he spoke with Amy privately, and their conversations gradually turned into flirting, then an intimate affair. This relationship began in late May 2018. The couple met about once a week for intimate, typically in cars on the farm's dirt roads or during brief stays in motel rooms. For Amy, it became a source of inspiration, leading her to express a desire to leave her husband and marry Jerry. This would require Jerry to get a divorce, but his wife was unaware of the affair. Jerry was content in his marriage and had no intention of divorcing. He did not take his relationship with Amy seriously and even wanted to end it, as he felt it had gone too far. Law enforcement officials recovered most of the letters exchanged between Jerry and Amy, revealing that their relationship lasted until the summer of 2018. At that point, Jerry suggested they slow things down because he was uncertain about their future together. Meanwhile, there were indications that Amy was determined to confess her feelings. This created a sense of threat for Jerry, providing him with a strong motive for murder. Jerry spent about an hour and a half confessing to the affair but maintained that he could not have killed Amy. He stated that at the time of the attack, he was at his home in Anamosa, which is a 45-minute drive from the crime scene. Investigators checked the mobile phone data of Jerry, which showed activity at the same times every hour. Jerry's cell phone active at around 10:45, 11:45, 12:45, all in Anamosa. However, this did not definitively confirm his alibi, as a calculated murderer would likely avoid taking their phone to the crime scene. The hourly activity raised suspicions, leaving him not entirely free from scrutiny. Investigators were still focused on the widower, Todd. He had a significant financial motive as well. If a divorce occurred, he would have to pay more than half of his income to support their 3 children. Friends mentioned that Amy, despite wanting a divorce, was afraid to leave Todd because she feared his reaction. Some described him as rude and aggressive, suggesting he could be capable of murder, although he had never been seen treating his wife poorly. The investigators then turned their attention to Todd's behavior on the day of Amy's death. During questioning, his reactions raised suspicions. Typically, innocent people defend themselves aggressively, but Todd remained calm when asked about the murder allegations. This calmness could indicate subconscious guilt. Overall, he was known to be a calm person with a quiet temperament. The farm had several cameras, one of which had a view of almost the entire area around the barn, where the murder occurred. Unfortunately, no recordings from that day were saved. It appears someone deleted them to hide their involvement. Given the circumstances, the prime suspect was the victim's husband. In February 2019, Todd Mollis was arrested and charged with murdering his wife. Nearly a year after Amy's death, both her family and the relatives of Todd gathered at the courthouse. Todd, a hard-working farmer known for being a devoted father, now faced charges for the brutal murder of his wife. The defense attorney agreed with the prosecution that the crime was premeditated but argued that Todd could not have attacked his wife with the corn rake, as Tristan had been in sight of him the whole time. They claimed there was no physical evidence linking Todd to the crime, no fingerprints, no DNA on the corn rake, and no traces of the attacker were found. The prosecution countered that the murder was driven by a personal motive, emphasizing that it wasn't a distant shooting but rather a close-range attack using an unusual weapon from the farm's tools. If a stranger had committed the crime, they likely wouldn't have used a tool found on the farm. Todd was familiar with that corn rake, skilled in its use, and knew exactly where it was kept. He acted decisively, leaving Amy no chance to escape. He attacked her multiple times. During the trial, many witnesses who knew both Amy and Todd testified. One of them was a doctor from the emergency room where the victim had worked as a nurse for many years. Amy was brought to the same hospital where she had previously saved lives. Unfortunately, shortly after her arrival, she was declared dead by the medical examiner and law enforcement. The doctors were puzzled by how a single blow from a 4-pronged corn rake could cause 6 deep wounds on Amy's body. The eldest son, Tristan, served as the main witness for the defense. Both sides carefully examined his statements during the hearings. The prosecution faced a challenge with the alibi that Tristan maintained. However, just days before the trial began, law enforcement re-interviewed Tristan. He admitted that he had lost sight of his father several times while fetching water for the shed, but insisted that his father was only gone for a few minutes each time. The defendant's lawyer argued that this brief absence was not enough time to commit the crime and hide the evidence. Yet, during the trial, Tristan changed his testimony again, stating that he could not accurately determine how long his father had been missing. This gave the prosecution a chance to highlight Todd's lack of an alibi. However, Tristan insisted that his father could not have killed his mother and claimed he did not see any blood on him, which allowed the defense attorney to build their argument. The defense maintained that Todd did not have enough time to get water, go to the shed, deal with his wife, and return. Furthermore, the blood spatter in the room where the attack took place was too extensive for the attacker to avoid getting covered in blood. The lawyer argued that the prosecution had no direct evidence against Todd, which was true. The case also leaned on the search histories of both the victim and the accused. Amy had searched online about how infidelity could affect property division in a divorce, while Todd's phone had concerning searches related to the consequences of murder. During the trial, Todd spent 3 hours answering the prosecutor's questions, maintaining his innocence and claiming he was unaware of Amy's new relationship. He explained to the jury that the security cameras were not functioning during the attack because, in his view, the cats had accidentally disconnected the wires while looking for a warm spot. Investigators was revealed that the cameras had been out of order for 2 weeks before Amy's death, and Todd only repaired the system after the police discovered the disconnected wires. By the end of the interrogations, the jury began deliberating the verdict. Because there was no direct evidence and many disagreements about the case, the jurors split into 2 groups with opposing opinions. After about 7 hours of discussion, Todd Mollis was found guilty of first-degree murder. The court sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Disappointed, Todd shook his head as he was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. He immediately disagreed with the verdict once it was announced. He hired a new legal team and filed a motion for a retrial. Todd argued that no one was in the shed when his wife accidentally fell on a corn rake after losing consciousness. She had been feeling dizzy and even visited the hospital the day before her death. There was no substantial evidence against Todd, just speculation and rumors, but his appeal was denied. Now, he is focused on appealing the verdict from prison and believes that justice will eventually be served. He feels an accidental incident took the life of a mother of 3, and an unjust legal system took their father from them. Todd and Amy Mollis's 3 children are now cared for by Amy's family.